Welcome to episode 55 of the Coast to Coast AFL podcast with Dick and Blaze. I am Blaze, your host, and this week we go through the entirety of round 6, the Easter long weekend, going from the Good Friday SuperClash. No, actually, the match before it being a 2023 grand final rematch, essentially, being
Hi.
Brisbane and Collingwood. We go into the Good Friday SuperClash between Carlton and North Melbourne, which is traditional, leading all the way up to the Easter Monday traditional clash between Geelong and Hawthorn. But before we get to that, how are you doing, Mr. Sarek?
Pulling up okay after Easter. It's not chocolates that's been the bane of my weekend. I actually went to my cousin. Well, sorry, not bane of my weekend, but I went to my cousin's 30th yesterday. And we played paddle, which is like I guess, sort of like pickleball, sort of like tennis. And yeah, it was really fun. In my old age, you know what I mean? It's like, yeah, gave myself a bit of a workout. Then, because my cousin loves it, we ended up doing karaoke for the rest of the night.
Oh, yeah.
So, lost a couple of tunes myself. Did a few that, had a bit of dancing. So I'm sort of a bit up and sore. But apart from that, going good. Very enjoyable night. Had a good Easter holiday. Hope everyone enjoyed Easter, however they choose to celebrate it. But yeah, how about you?
Yeah, mine wasn't too bad. I spent most of it with my parents. I was down there Friday, all of Good Friday. I was down there yesterday as well, spending most of the time with them. Watched most of the footy there with them. It was a good time. I went to Richmond Gold Coast, of course. I was Brits on for that. Got to see another great win, one that no one expected once again, but I will take those. So it's been a good weekend. Got to see my dogs, got to see my cat. Just got to relax, eat some chocolate, and have a good time.
Awesome.
Speaking of good games, though, shall we jump into the games for the week?
Yeah, I'm not sure we're starting with a good game, unless you're a Collingwood supporter.
True.
But it definitely was a rare game to see, because despite having roughly equal possessions, Brisbane could not manage either territory or forward half score against a Collingwood side that was very disciplined and stable. The score was 7-11-53 for the Lions and 6-9, 105. So that's a 52 win at the Gabba for the Magpies. Very big win. And although the scoreline, Brisbane will be ruining a few accuracy problems on their set shots. They didn't actually score in general play shot. They didn't score a goal in general play shots as well, which didn't help their cause. And they're 37 inside 50s. And I had to do a bit of a deep dive on because I thought, Brisbane very four-half team. It's very rare for them to, see an under 41. West Coast have had a lot of that this year, but apparently, first time they've gone under 40 inside 50 since round 4, 2018, when they were still developing with Fagan. So it's been a mighty long time since they've been restricted that heavily. But, it's not all about Brisbane. Obviously, Collingwood had to apply the pressure that they did. And their methodology was absolutely fantastic. I will say, not a huge, I know everyone says, Nick Dacos on the stats and all that, but, in terms of, ranking points and all that stuff, Collingwood haven't really had huge performers, but they've had a hell of a lot of, down the line, solid performances week in, week out, and it just seems to get them over the line most of the part. And this one, this is sort of where, Nick Dacos goes a bit more off the chain at, 38. Josh not too far behind him. I think he scored 30, didn't he?
Yeah, it was above 30. They both had above 30.
Yeah, exactly. So, it was just, everyone was putting their part. And I think, even though, a few kicks might get you a few more things, it was their handball chains that just allow them to hit dangerous areas. Because, once they got it in ball in hand to the user with a bit of open space, they were just hitting targets in their forward line and, doing very well.
Yeah,
So,
that's right.
I think the best way to describe Brisbane's movement was a lack of generation. Had a lot of possession on the wing, but couldn't work the ball up that much. Lost all 4 quarters of the territory battle, which I would love to see when the last time that happened was, because that would be fairly rare too. And it pretty much lived in their own back half.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't like Collingwood were restrictive. Well, they were restrictive, but it was all ahead of the ball. So they were letting Brisbane chip around the back half. They did still get over 100 marks on them. Well, that's Brisbane on Collingwood. And Collingwood didn't even particularly intercept all that heavily. But yeah, it was just Brisbane was starting a lot of chains so deep in their own defence. And due to centre square dominance by the Magpies, which again you don't really see, Brisbane were normally having to start it back because Collingwood would get it into their forward half first.
Mm-hmm.
So, defensive solid. Brisbane couldn't move it from their back half. Obviously, they're not quite as good as back half movement, but they're still a lot better than what they would hope to be on that night. As I said, it was just Collingwood seems to have had a much more consistent style game, and for this one, it just benefited them a lot better. Like, as I mentioned, they're not the flashiest team this year, but you can't say they haven't got the job done. So, they deserve to have taken I would say, fairly unexpected win. I think I was at the Gabba. This was like a 60-40 tip that most people tip Brisbane just because it was at the Gabba and the rating premiers. But yeah, we all sort of got caught out a little bit. So, fortunately, we all lost tips to Collingwood fans, which you hate to see, but yeah.
Yeah, no, it's exactly right. It's just no one expected Brisbane to just get embarrassed at their own ground against a team that has been very 50-50 so far this season.
Say 50-50, but they haven't been clinical, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I guess they were a bit against the Swans, but you know what I mean? We're all a bit uncertain how much of that was just the Swans, and we'll talk about them a bit later. But you know what I mean? The Bulldogs, okay, win. A bit lucky in the end. Obviously got smashed by G-Dubs, and there was another... even Carlton, when they're big then, they weren't that, impressive. So, this just might be where they get a top 8 position, so far, just by being consistent enough. And compared to last year, where certain lines were just dropping off this week, it's not the worst looking Collingwood side you could see. I think fans would be very happy with where they're at, even if they could improve in certain areas. Sometimes their forward work seems a bit unsustainable at times, but for the most part, it gets their job done, and yeah, they're looking good so far.
Yeah, definitely they are, and it's all credit to my first individual performer being Nick Dacos, of course. He was absolutely electric, kicking a goal from 38 disposals, 29 of them effective, equating to 76.3% efficiency, 10 contested possessions, 6 marks, 6 inside 50s, 8 clearances, 12 score involvements, 5 ground ball gets, and 645 metres gained. Dan McStay was very important against his old side. He kicked 3-1 from 8 touches, 6 of them effective, equating to 75% efficiency, 5 contested possessions, 3 marks with 2 of them contested and all of them inside 50, and 6 score involvements. And Jeremy Howe, as he normally is an absolute pillar in defence. He finished with 16 disposals, all of them effective, equating to 100% efficiency, 4 intercepts, 7 marks, 3 score involvements, 6 1%ers, 5 spoils, and 96% time on ground. For Brisbane, big one for me that stood out is usually the big O, Oscar McInerney. He contended well with Darcy Cameron, getting 17 hitouts, 4 of them to advantage, and 2 goals from 13 touches, 7 contested possessions, 4 marks, 3 inside 50s, 5 clearances, 6 score involvements, 3 1%ers, and 2 spoils. Shoutouts also to Brisbane debutant Sam Marshall, who finished with 6 touches, 2 marks, and a clearance.
Yeah, and I guess that's the other thing, is that that wasn't as expected is pretty much, I think, Collingwood's midfield. And I think, obviously, coming from last week where I think I hailed Brisbane as the best midfield in the competition by a fair bit, yeah, just got touched up a little bit. Like, Lockie Neal had a lot of hard stats. I was only lightly watching this. I was actually out with a friend for dinner, but we're watching it at a sports bar, so you know what I mean. It was like, I could see the players and all that, but like just as a general sense, as I said, Lockie Neal got a few disposals, but wasn't quite as damaging as he could be. And normally when you say that, it's like, oh, Hugh McCluggage normally goes off the chain, but he was kept very quiet, and it just felt like, just by winning the ball first and working it out quickly, Brisbane weren't able to force any turnovers from the middle, which they can do. They're not the highest tackling team because they do honestly get the ball first most of the time, which, makes it hard to then tackle. But it was just, Collingwood just did the most with the ball early, and that just allowed them to play just restrictive by possession. So, it was very good by them. And as I said, bit of a step back for Brisbane, but they've sort of been, I don't want to say they've been fishing for this sort of loss, but you know what I mean? Like, they have been a bit patchy in between quarters of the game. So this is just one where, for the whole time, they just couldn't get anything going.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. In terms of injuries, Lockie Sullivan was managed for Collingwood, being a late change. He might have just pulled up a little bit sore in the training. As for the MRO reports, Jeremy Howe was fined $1,000 for attempting to trip Will Ashcroft, and Nick Dacos was fined $1,000 for other misconduct, is what the report says, against Jared Berry. I don't know exactly what happened, but that's how it was reported.
Do you think he, I don't know, maybe he stole his switch in the change room? Maybe something like that, you know what I mean?
Done something a little more pesky.
Just, don't know. Bit pesky.
Just a bit pesky.
Exactly. Refused his friend request.
Yeah, something like that.
Send bots to his podcast. I don't know.
Something like that. Who knows? Anyway, considering that was a pretty short game, let's move on to another short game. Get through these ones pretty quick. And that is the traditional Good Friday SuperClash between North Melbourne and Carlton.
Yeah. I guess to start off with a bit of a lighter note, I call absolute conspiracy. North sort of joked a few years ago, back when they started the Good Friday appeal. Every time they would play these matches, it would be, for every goal kicked, there would be a donation, $1,000. And then there was the infamous St Kilda versus North Melbourne game where I think it was either 3 or 4 goals were kicked in total by halftime, and not that much better by the end of the match. So after they did that, they changed it to just adding some free entertainment fluff that decided the money. But if they did it now, they would be breaking it in.
It really would.
There would be no sick kids ever if North's defense was allowed to dictate the amount of money going to it. So, unfortunately, as I'm sort of alluding to, North didn't have a very good Friday. Came defensively unrivaled by Carlton, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
The midfield and backline got absolutely torn apart by ruthless Carlton pressure. The final score was 11-5-71 to 24-9-153. Blues by 82 at Marvel Stadium.
Yes.
And Ball was stuck in their back half for most of the game. North was again really efficient when it went inside 50. Scoring 71 from another game with under 40 entrances. This time it was 39. And Paul Curtis and Luke Parker looked pretty lively. But it was just Carlton's tall defenders as well. Standing up solidly against North Tolls that made, it was sort of weird. Like, it depends on how you want to look at good or bad. It's good because it meant that North didn't get absolutely blown out by 100 points, but bad in the sense that it took such good conversion for this not to be an absolute blowout. North midfield was just way too easily way too easy to move the ball against. They tried a lot of combinations, but Hewitt and Chera absolutely feasted. While Cripps sort of took it a bit easy, rotating the forward line. Not saying that Cripps wasn't trying, but you know what I mean. Like he was just doing his role, providing some more forward link up. Carlton scored 15-5 from stoppage, including 5-2 from centre bounce, helped by the fact that they doubled North centre clearances numbers and generated a lot of general play score close to goal, an area which Carlton have normally lacked all year.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty one-sided affair, and I'll probably skip through some of these notes, but I do want your opinion, because we have talked about it before, and how I've said, yeah, North could probably use some defensive efforts, and I've been talking to a few friends about them, but if you were to put all the teams in the list, and we can go through it if you want, just with teams on the ladder, where would you put right now? And we can even just talk about inside midfield. You know, where would you put North's midfield if you were to rank all the teams? Because I think it would be hard to put them above the bottom 6, and I'd be struggling to put them above the bottom 4, in my opinion.
I agree with you. I think they're still bottom 4 material. Whether they're above a team like West Coast. Well, considering West Coast performance against the Bombers, it does kind of give them a little bit more, a little bit more hope in that side. Although that's it's still very few and far
We're
between.
talking about inside midfield, though.
True.
You know what
inside
I mean?
midfield,
like,
yeah, it's much higher than the Eagles right now.
Yeah.
I don't know who I'd put below them though, if other than West Coast. Because I think Richmond's is a lot better.
I'd probably say Richmond.
No, West so much better.
Oh, inside midfield, then.
Inside midfield was so much better.
North Melbourne.
Yep.
Okay. I mean,
now that I've seen more,
now that
I've seen more of what we're capable of, we're so much better than North.
Oh, yeah. Melbourne this year has been absolutely dreadful, despite the match we're going to talk about. So they've still only had one game where they're lifted, and I would still toss up St Kilda. That's probably where they're the weakest. But those are like the only teams where I could confidently say North. I would still put Richmond under, but you know what I mean. Like Richmond, St Kilda, North could probably be like their own tier, and Melbourne could be like potentially better, but
or potentially worse because we haven't seen enough of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I really just mentioned that because this is like the thing where I had a look through North, and because again, like I had a bit of a look just through my theory that just North don't have a hard player in the midfield, and I know Wardlaw's coming in, but I wanted to put it into like a statistical context. So of all of North's midfield at the moment, they are negative in all clearances and post clearances stat this year in terms of differential. And as a inside midfield, sans Wardlaw, who obviously on one match, a below average intercept generation team. So yeah, it's just like one of those things where they probably. Sorry, I'm just fixing up something at the moment, but yeah. So when you look at it, the only contested winner that they have at the moment is Cherry, because neither Simkin, LDU, Sheasel, or what's the other one? Tom Powell.
Powell.
Whichever Powell it is. None of them are ball winners. Like they've got 3 handball receive players, so it just puts a lot on Wardlaw and Cherry to win the ball. And Wardlaw is only in his second year. Cherry probably prefers the kick out of the contest rather than the handball. So it's just not synergizing at the moment. And it's like, look, I'm going to put in like, not a controversial opinion, but like a stupid opinion. Like as a list manager, like, and this is ridiculous. Like theoretically, you could probably trade LDU for a Tom Atkins. You know what I mean? Like, I know you wouldn't, but at this point, they just don't have the pieces in that midfield, I think, to generate good midfield-based play.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to win games now, that's what I'm sort of saying. Like, in the future, obviously, you don't trade LDU for Tom Atkins. But if you did that move now, I think North's midfield would be better. And, Tom Atkins is just like me picking a pressure player. You could put row bottom, whatever. I'm not like looking for like to like when I say that. But you know what I mean. So yeah, it's just a bit disappointing to see, because right now I think pretty much we can pretty much agree that North are just going to win games through their forward 50 work. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree.
And that's going to be hard to do when your defense is still leaky as anything. So they're going to have to pick up some pretty big scores and have their opponent not score for them to be a threat this year.
Yeah, exactly right. Especially, when we looked on paper at this match, no one was kind of expecting Carlton to just completely come out and dominate. Well, for the fact that you and I tipped North Melbourne because we thought they had looked a little bit better. But Carlton's midfield got completely firing. Yeah, so do I. But
yeah, it's
Carlton's midfield.
When I thought about it, I was like, yeah, Carlton's midfield could probably smash them just because they are so contested, and they'll probably just get them enough ball movement. But I didn't expect Carlton to convert so truly either.
It was a complete shootout. 31 goals was scored, and 14 behinds. Like that's a really solid output.
And yeah, Carlton were obviously, it's sort of hard to tell because Carlton, these last two matches, have actually moved the ball not terrifically well. They only scored 27 from defensive half, which actually tied North Melbourne. But you know what I mean? Like, their movement did seem a lot better, where they were at least moving the ball forward to stoppages, which they were able to work with. Where before they just weren't getting it far enough before turning it over. So, again, they'll see in the next few weeks whether they can maintain that about good opposition, whether this is actual growth. But at least there's like bits and pieces here. You know what I mean? It's just so weird when, you get 2 wins in a row, boost up your percentage, but you're still wondering if you're actually any good.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's really hard to tell for North at the moment, and it's even hard to tell with Carlton at the moment.
No, sorry, that's what I meant for Carlton.
So yeah. I realized that after I said it, that's exactly what you meant.
Yeah, it's all good.
But speaking of Carlton, their individual players that I want to highlight for this week is George Hewitt. He put up an absolute show. He kicked a goal from 34 disposals, 28 of them effective, equating to 84.2% efficiency, 21 contested possessions, 6 inside 50s, 12 clearances, 8 score involvements, 9 tackles, 15 pressure acts, 13 ground ball gets, and 417 metres gained. Charlie Curnow was in form up forward. He kicked 4-3 from 15 touches, 8 contested possessions, 5 marks, all of them inside 50, 11 score involvements, and 9 pressure acts. And then Jack Silvani was so important in defence. He collected 18 disposals, 13 of them effective, equating to 72.2% efficiency, 4 contested possessions, 7 intercepts, 7 marks, 4 of them being intercept marks, 3 inside 50s, 4 score involvements, 6 1%ers, and 8 spoils. And then for North Melbourne, as we've already talked about, Tristan Sherry. He was the only one that I felt like could really stand tall. He got 43 hitouts with 17 of them to advantage, and 14 touches, 10 of them effective, equating to 71.4% efficiency. 13 contested possessions, 6 score involvements, 11 tackles, 14 pressure acts, and 5 1%ers.
Yeah, I would say I thought George Wardlaw, for the limited amount of time, did fairly well. Obviously, I don't think he was quite getting the defensive side of his game going. And I know that they, as we've been talking about, he might actually provide a bit of that more defensive grit in there. I wouldn't call him a defensive midfielder, but you know what I mean. At least it's edging the numbers in the right direction. But yeah, I thought he actually did a lot of good work around clearances and, at least was a bit more accountable to his direct opponents than, some of the others, because, as I said, it just felt like, yeah, Carlton's midfielders was getting one or two more steps ahead, or especially someone like a George Hewitt, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
he was able to collect so many, ground balls and, contested possessions. But they didn't look contested, you know what I mean? Like, they were pretty much just getting a bit before winning the contest and then looking to set up the next bit of play.
Yeah, exactly
Normally
right.
a handball to some of the other players, but yeah, it was absolutely fantastic.
For sure, for sure.
Honestly, I had a talk with my Carlton supporting mate, and I think we're both in agree. This year, you have to have George Hewitt as their best performing midfield at the moment.
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, depends actually. If you count Tom de Koning, like if you count Rucks in like the midfield discussion, then it's a bit touch and go. But in terms of pure actual midfield, George Hewitt, yeah, might
Yeah.
be one of the best in the comps. Might be top 10 from his performance here.
Yeah, even if you just look at all the stats on paper, he's easily top 10 right now. Whether how
Yeah,
that equates to like all the other midfielders, we'd have to look at that very specifically. But he's easily a top 10 midfielder right now.
yeah,
No doubt about
oh
it.
yeah.
All right.
So yeah, uh,
As for injuries, Zach Fisher, for Carlton. No. Yes. I can't remember. Yes.
yeah, Carlton.
I didn't write that. I don't know. I
Oh,
don't
sorry,
write
no,
down
no.
things. I'm pretty sure he's
Zach Fisher for North Melbourne.
North
He
Melbourne.
used to
Right.
play for Carlton.
That's right. I knew there was a connection there somewhere. Anyway, he may have done a
Yeah.
hamstring. He went off with a hamstring complaint. I don't know if it's super bad. Hopefully, it's not too bad for him. As for the MRO report, there was only one, and that is for Patrick Cripps. There was some captain on captain violence. Apparently, he was fined $1,875 for striking Jai Simkin. Um, yeah, that's it for that game.
Yeah, so shall we go to a close game for this round?
We
One that
shall.
not many people are expecting to be a clinical contest.
Yeah,
That's all turned into one.
no one was expecting the West Coast Eagles to play this as close as they did. But let's jump over to the West for West Coast and Essendon at Optus Stadium.
And look, we've got an Essendon supporting friend. I know a few others in real life. And I think we all know there was a familiar shiver running down the spine of Essendon's fans. Despite the two solid wins in a row before this match, they were trailing by around 30 points to the Eagles early in the second half and could just not find a solid way to score against them. Waterman kicked 4 goals against Essendon before Essendon even kicked their second. It was looking a bit dire early on. The Dons were winning a lot of clearances, but the Eagles finally started putting pressure on inside midfield. Oh, sorry, on the inside midfield. They didn't win them themselves, but baby steps, I guess, is what you're going to say for them. As both teams could at least move the ball around the ground outside of the contest. It's just the Eagles generate a lot more set shots than the Bombers, who really relied on Mr. Right to do a lot of the contested big forward work. And yeah, as I said, it was pretty close, but the Dons did manage to eke out the win. Got a bit ahead in the last quarter. Eagles tried to make the late comeback, but the last bit of clearance work sealed it for them as they won against the Eagles, who scored 11-9-75, whereas the Dons scored 11-11-77.
Yes.
And yeah, as I said, going back to the West Coast in midfield, again, you wouldn't say that they matched up against Essendon. Essendon's midfield were just all round better, but at least they were having solid individual moments. Elijah Hewitt's 2 goals after a quiet start really sparked the Eagles. Well, I think the first goal, actually, I think he got the second one a bit later, but it did feel like a bit of a kickstart. And after Tim Kelly, after a quiet game in the Waffle, showed that he's still got a bit of fight left in him. He had a pretty solid game, and as well as Jack Graham. So they got a bit of that. McGovern coming back, sort of, I thought, allowed the solid growth of Marriage as a defender to be a bit more pronounced because, it seemed like both of them were going very well. And, of all the Eagles' defense, it was really only Harry Edwards that got absolutely beaten by Peter Wright this week. And that's just sort of a height matchup problem.
Yeah,
You know what
right.
I mean? Like, Edwards is, I think, I would say he's at best 190, 192. They don't really get height much but back there. And obviously, I guess they were sort of my Marriage is a bit more of a so much a +1, but you know what I mean, a contest crasher and all that. So, apart from Mackay, they did reasonably well against a solid amount of entries. So, yeah, while it wasn't terrific, um, I think the backbone of Essendon helped them stave off another disappointing loss to a random bad side.
Yeah.
They will still have to work on finding their best distribution options when Merrin isn't involved in the play. Like, I think their inside midfield, who I'm referring to is, of course, Setterfield, Durham, who's the other one up there?
Merritt?
I've forgotten. No, well, Merritt had quite one.
Oh, yeah, true.
There's someone else who goes in the mix too, but Shield.
That's right, Dylan Shield.
But you know what I mean. It was just one of those ones where it was a lot of work for not as much production as they would like. So yeah, so it was good because the Eagles at least made them accountable. They couldn't do everything, but they still, did enough. But, as I said, on the flip side, though, the Eagles got almost all of their score off turnovers. So, you know what I mean? Essendon still have a bit of polish that they need to work on.
Mm-hmm.
But, as I said, fun fact as well, Essendon finally joined the coast to coast ranks. They have not done this year, scored a goal from kick in, which they were able to do against the Eagles side.
Yay!
So they got the win. They got the coast to coast goal. And, I think it's just a bit of a sigh of relief just getting the win against a plucky Eagles side. Wasn't terrific, a lot of turnovers, but, it was fairly admirable by the Eagles. And as I said, you still got to give Essendon a bit of props for just not completely losing it.
Yeah, absolutely. The fact that the Eagles surprised them massively and they still managed to fight back for it, despite it being extremely close, and you would have expected Essendon to make it a much bigger win, a much bigger margin, considering where both teams currently are. It's credit to them for still being able to at least fight back and get that win. Credit to the Eagles for making it close, for showing some signs of improvement, even if they are small. It's better than nothing, especially against Essendon of all teams. And hopefully they're able to take this on in their stride, and it contributes to much. I'm not going to say quicker development, but much healthier development in terms of what they want to do for the rest of this year.
Yeah, that's right. Because you know what I mean? It's like, it's not hard because, again, if you're looking at game plan and all that, it was still for the Eagles much more of a forward half effort. And I think, again, the problem for the Eagles is still not getting enough disposal and inside 50. Not so much for this game. Well, not so much for disposal in this game. Inside 50s probably could have used a few more opportunities. But you know what I mean? At least when they're given the chance to get something going, they're making the most of it because, you know what I mean? Like, there's other games where they've had turnovers and they've just moved the ball so slowly and not being able to capitalize from it. So, it feels like this is at least a first step in that regard.
Yeah, that's exactly right. To the individuals, and we will talk about Mr. 2 Meter Peter Wright, who came back into the side after fighting his way back in via the VFL. He was absolutely dominant up forward. He kicked 6-1 from 17 disposals, 14 of them effective, equating to 82.4% efficiency, 6 contested possessions, 7 marks with 5 of them inside 50, 9 score involvements, and 13 pressure acts. Will Setterfield put on the pressure through the midfield, finishing with 20 touches, 12 of them effective, equating to 60% efficiency, 6 contested possessions, 5 marks, 3 inside 50s, 5 clearances, 9 tackles, 15 pressure acts, and 432 metres gained. And then young recruit Jackson Pryor, who they took from Brisbane, he put in solid defensive work, collecting 18 disposals, 15 of them effective, according to 83.3% efficiency, 5 intercepts, 4 marks, 3 of them being intercept marks, 3 inside 50s, 4 score involvements, 4 1%ers, and 3 spoils. For West Coast, Matt Flynn went out against Sam Draper before Draper did his injury. He got 28 hitouts, 5 of them to advantage, and 19 touches, 13 of them effective, equating to 68.4% efficiency, 9 contested possessions, 5 intercepts, 7 marks, with 4 of them being contested, 6 inside 50s, 4 score involvements, 10 pressure acts, 7 1%ers, 7 spoils, and 447 metres gained. Then, of course, as you mentioned before, Jake Waterman had the kicking boots on. He kicked 4 goals from 13 disposals, 12 of them effective, equating to 92.3% efficiency, 10 marks, 8 score involvements, and 355 metres gained.
Yeah, so I give props because obviously after he kicked those 4 goals, he got Ridley. He shut him down a tiny bit. But the problem with Essendon, and I will say this, is again, defending those tools, they're still having trouble finding the flexibility in their defense because obviously once Waterman got the attention of Ridley, Jack Williams started to have a really good game. So again, Essendon's defense, they still need another tall defender there. But as I said, when you work hard above the ball, try and limit entries, again, only against West Coast, you still set enough of your game going. And then this is what I always say is sometimes in midfield can help a bit of a patchier defense. So,
Yeah.
Again, it just felt like enough by Essendon, but, again, a game you should win, against a plucky Eagle side, still at home, still got the crowd around him, but they at least got it done. So I'll give them props.
Yep, I agree. I agree with that. To the injuries, and as I mentioned just before, Sam Draper did do an Achilles injury that knocks him out for the entirety of the rest of the season, which means that the only key ruck that they have left over is Todd Goldstein, and because of his age, it's not entirely reliable.
Well, he's actually a ruck coach as well. You know what I mean? Like, this is actually sort of he'd already started being involved, I think, at the VFL level. You know, as I mean, like guiding their youngsters through it. So, I'm imagining that Essendon are probably going to look to the mid-season draft to get maybe not a ruckman, but a ruck forward just to try and even it out because Ben Reid took a few when they went down. Obviously, they would have preferred him in the back, especially during those tighter moments as the Eagles were coming back. But yeah, as I said, it's going to be, a mixture of Goldstein and maybe Nat Caddy, I'd imagine, for a while.
Probably.
So it's a bit of a...
Their options
It's
are
a bit
very
unfortunate. Yeah, well, as I said, Caddy's sort of one of those things is only really starting to find his feet as forward. So maybe it's a good thing for him to change it up, but I think the Essendon coach would much rather him work his craft in the forward line because that's where he is probably going to be the most dangerous in terms of like longer term next few years. So
yeah, exactly right. And also Xavier Dersma, he got hit in the ribs in a contest. So he was taken out late in the game. Hopefully he's all right and should be fine for next week. But that remains to be seen at the moment. Nothing else too bad.
and no MROs, which is always good, I suppose.
Yeah, I was very surprised that there was only one MRO report from the Friday games, and there were no MRO reports, unless it just hasn't been updated yet, from the Saturday games, which we are jumping over to now, starting with Melbourne and Fremantle at the MCG.
Mm, absolutely. And, while there weren't that many fans to see the D's light it up for their first win of the season, those that did go down there were treated to a much different D's outfit. More so in the way they went about it, because despite my pleas to good win, during the week he didn't listen to the Coast to Coast podcast, Blazy. He did not change a thing at centre bounce. And yet they still dominated Fremantle's midfield early on. All three of Viney, Petrarca, and maybe lesser so Oliver were having standout days. Again, brilliant first half. A few of them dropped off in the second, but they were still very good. Um, and yeah, as I said, they got off to their early jump. Freo were able to reel it in, but as I said, Melbourne's managed to stand tall. The final scoreline was 16-11, 107 to 14-13, 97. So again, unfortunately, even though this was like a bit of a junk time goal getting it back in, it's funny, it's the opposite of the Murphy Reed goal earlier that got them out of that 10-point and under region. Now they've got another loss by within 10 points. Where, yeah, it wasn't actually that close a match. I think Melbourne still had a fair bit of control. And it was on the back of a lot of stoppage work. So Max Gawn was absolutely dominant all night. Melbourne scored 32 of their 43 stoppage points from centre bounce, which meant that, as I said, a lot of it was coming early. Again, Fremantle having problems defending from stoppage as well. Melbourne also moved the ball from its back half really well and caught Freo's defence, which was an absolute mess all night, napping as they scored 15-6 from 30 metres or less, including 4 general play goals from pretty much the centre square, as Freo just often let too much space goal side open for a team that didn't overly rack up back half intercepts. And what I mean from that is like sometimes in order to create intercepts in your like half back line, you're gonna have to risk it and let a bit of open space down the back of you.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? It's like, you drift off, you get the ball early so it doesn't get there. And, it looks silly when you don't get it. But, some things just go to it. But, like, Fremantle weren't getting the intercepts. This was just bad manning up. And, it just, again, allowed a team that struggled so much to score, get freebies. As I said, 107. Well, actually, I think I make the point later on. Yeah, so I'll say now, Melbourne in the first half scored 74 points. That equaled the most they had scored all year, which was I said round 0, but I think it was round 1 against the Giants, where they scored 70 points, 4 points, and lost that Lachlan Keefe goal.
Yes.
So
Correct.
74 points. Obviously, scoring dropped off in the second half. As I mentioned, Fremantle's midfield got back on top of it. But yeah, as I said, I think the other thing too, looking at the other side of it, which ended up being a bit of a let-off for the D's, was how late it took Fremantle to take advantage of the Demons' undersized defense. Tom McDonald worked hard on Tracy, who struggled all night. And for the first half, Jai Amos was pretty much a non-factor. I will say he did lift in the second half when the D's wore out, but it almost felt a bit like too little too late. He got gifted a goal as well from the goal square from just, a picker player down the field free kick. But you know what I mean? It was probably one of the least impressive free goals 2 game that I've seen from a player. But it was still it was still not the worst. They also had Oscar McDonald, so it was a bit of a brother fight off. I think they did play against each other a couple of times. And I thought Oscar, just did fairly admirably. It was good to see him back from injury. Obviously filling in for Voss, who got suspended for 3 weeks.
Yes.
But in reality, it was really the smalls for Freo that had to generate so much of their scoring offense. And what I will say for this match, it did lead to a third quarter where it was a brilliant display of football, where it was Bolton v Pickett in a show who could be the most damaging with disposal and speed. But unfortunately, in the last, in maybe poetic, maybe unpoetic fashion, Bolton tried to sell some candy, tried to create a goal, but ended up landing on his ass and spraying it out of bounds on the full, which sort of just summed up Frio's general play scoring that day.
Pretty funny.
They were just, their tolls weren't firing, and they still were relying on set shots for most of their score. So, as I mentioned, another technical under 10 loss for Freo. But the pressure applied by Melbourne to lift and make up for their defense, I think, could be noted by a few teams. I mentioned it before with Essendon in terms of what they did. But, as I said, on the flip side, North, I think it was another team I had in mind when I was making that point. I'm not quite sure which one. But, as I said, it's just, they say a lot about the Dockers and it's like, oh, the young team, they don't have enough clutch or whatever. But really, I think it's just a pronounced problems and it's just sometimes it affects them, sometimes they don't. But, they score a bit too easily from stoppages. And it also goes back to the fact that a lot of their around the ground players, again, there's a bit of a gulf between their best and worst player, like a Matt Johnson, again, he's in the stoppage work, is just not lifting when other players don't lift. Like Hayden Young had a bit of a quiet day and there wasn't really anyone to replace him in the midfield. And even in this game, there was a lot of veteran underperformers like Sean Darcy, Josh Tracy, and Alex Pearce, amazingly. They all really had underwhelming game from usually reliable veterans.
Yeah, it was very weird, and I don't know if it was like a weather factor because it was a bit wet and dreary. That was probably also part of the reason why there weren't that many fans, apart from to Melbourne being a fairly lowly team right now, and Fremantle being from interstate with not that many fans in Victoria. I'm surprised that this game
rained during the entire match.
Yeah, but it was still like.
I mean, it might have rained during and about, but no, as I said, it was actually looked pretty sunny.
Oh no, yeah, because I was in the city
the conditions were
when
fine.
when this match happened. There was a little bit of drizzle early on, but it wasn't too wet. It was just a bit cloudy mostly. But yeah, like just the 20K people at the MCG for this game. It's not a great audience, but Melbourne got their win. They're finally on the board. They're away from West Coast in terms of that regard. And yeah, it's hopeful that it may lead to some more wins for them down the road. This will be like a good stepping stone, a good building block for them. And in terms of Freo, it's just one of those other losses that, despite the good second half, despite the fight back that they did have, it just it's just not enough for them to really take on board, and it's just something that they just have to learn from.
Yeah, well, as I said, I'm not sure if it is a learning from experience. I think this is just who Freo are, you know what I mean? And I think scoring wise, again, very weird to say, like Fremantle should be fine scoring relatively okay, but as I said, I think they're just stoppages are just leaking into their defense, which have just had a bit of an off start to the year. And if they can get their defense back in tune, then it's just like one problem. And like all teams have one problem. You know what I mean? Like that's just football. You can't be perfect in every area, but because it's like two problems that linked up, like Fremantle's defensive six haven't been performing as well as they have in other years restrictively, and B, their midfield don't stop stoppage scores. You know what I mean? It just allows too much avenue to score. And again, for Fremantle, who do struggle maintaining leads, do struggle in close games, it's those easy opportunities. Where in a tough game when the pressure's on, the last thing you want to do is give up a score from like 5 meters away from goal.
Yeah,
because you're not going to miss that. It's not going to be like a set shot from 30 where in a close match you're probably 10% more likely to miss. So
yeah, no, that's exactly right.
Just about limiting those easier opportunities. Yeah.
But speaking of someone who did take their opportunities, I'm going to jump over to my first individual, as you mentioned before, Cozzy Pickett. he pretty much lit up the Drury MCG. He kicked 5-2 from 24 disposals, 19 of them effective,
Yeah.
equating to
Beautiful.
79.2% efficiency. 10 contested possessions, 5 marks, 6 inside 50s, 4 clearances, 10 score involvements, 10 pressure acts, 6 ground ball gets, and 475 meters gained. Jack Viney was back to his pressure best. He was moved on to Caleb Sarong and did an absolute number on slowing him down. He kicked 1-1 from 25 touches, 19 of them effective, equating to 76% efficiency. 10 contested possessions, 7 inside 50s, 5 clearances, 7 score involvements, 8 tackles, 4 of them being inside 50, 25 pressure acts, 7 ground ball gets, and 458 minutes gained. Max Gawn dominated the ruck as he was also back to solid form. He got 31 hitouts, but 4 of them to advantage, and 28 disposals, 18 contested possessions, 7 marks, 10 clearances, 2 pines, and 12 score involvements. As for Freo, Shea Bolton was very lively. He kicked 3-1 from 20 touches, 16 of them effective, equating to 80% efficiency, 5 contested possessions, 9 marks, 7 inside 50s, 12 score involvements, 12 pressure acts, and 535 meters gained. I thought Brandon Cox stepped up in defense, especially in that second half. He finished with 7 disposals, 5 intercepts, 3 marks, 11 1%ers, and 10 spoils. He was pretty much impacting every contest he could down there. Shout out to Oscar McDonald because he returned from injury that has plagued him since last year, since very, very early last year. He's now playing in a forward sort of ruck position, and he had 9 disposals at 100% efficiency, 5 marks, 4 tackles, 4 score enrollments, a goal, and 5 hitouts.
Yeah, and there's one final point I want to make, and that is of the captain, Max Gawn. Unfortunately, you didn't mention it, but it wasn't that high. It was 3 intercept marks, but I'm pretty sure all 3 of them were fairly deep in defense.
Oh, yeah.
And you know what I mean? When the Melbourne, with their undersized defense coming into this game, especially when, unfortunately, you mentioned this, they lost Disco Turner. He was actually playing as a defender to medium effect, to be fair. But, he was trying. You know what I mean? Like, for the captain to go back, make those big, tall marks in defense, you know what I mean? It's a very big tone setter. And, again, in my opinion, that's sort of like the underrated ability that sort of got him All-Australian was his ability to patch up in defense as a last line. He is very good on the goal line. But,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, as I said, I just thought that deserved a bit of highlighting for this match because, yeah, as I said, there was just a few moments where it seemed like Fremantle's Tols were finally going to get something, and Big Maxi Gawn was there to intercept that as best he could.
Yeah, absolutely. He was so important to saving off Freo's fight back in that second half. But as you mentioned, as for injuries, Melbourne did lose Daniel Turner to concussion, so he will miss the Anzac Eve clash coming up this week, and he'll also probably miss next week's clash, I believe. As for Fremantle, they lost Diego O'Meara to a hamstring complaint, and Heath Chapman was a late change with illness, so Chapman will be back next week later this week, as expected. But yeah, losing O'Meara right when O'Meara has been pretty solid for the past couple of weeks is pretty rough.
Yeah, and performing pretty well in that match, because as I said, the Dockers midfield didn't really set up, and as I said, Amira going down. I think the only one that was really firing all cylinders at halftime was Andrew Brayshaw. Sarong was held very quiet, did lift in the second half, and as I said, Hayden Young wasn't quite as impactful in his disposal. So, as I said, maybe if you want to be like optimistic on Fremantle, if they had Jager O'Meara, they might have actually staged the comeback. I think that's a bit generous. But you know what I mean? It was just, it just always seems like a few small things as well for Freo. Like, I do believe they generally deserve a lot of these close losses, but you can't help to think, it's a bit like Adelaide, where there's enough mix of unlucky moments too, where you just like, there's not much in a game of football sometimes.
Yeah, that's very right. All right, let's jump over to a very low-scoring, very wet affair.
I was about to say,
Yeah,
not much in a game of football could be used to describe this match.
this is very, very true. This was extremely low-scoring, extremely what's the word I'm looking for? Very impaired,
Dower.
very dour in
Yeah.
terms of accuracy. But we're going over to the Adelaide
Mm.
Oval for Adelaide Crows versus the GWS Giants.
Yes, and this was definitely in a bit more wet and greasier conditions. I will say that did affect it a bit. Not as much as it probably got represented on the scoreboard, but yeah, as I said, GWS, I've been saying it all year, when they do not get their game going, they really clamp down on teams. They try and restrict movement as much as they can until they get the ball going themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And although this game was ugly as heck, you couldn't help but admire Adelaide's defensive efforts not to let GWS grind through them, as their defenders like Murray, Hinge, Makalani, and Keane all had big wins against their opponents and were good enough with ball in hand just to, take those grounded movement efforts from GWS and convert them into solid time in their forward half. I won't say they went down and kicked goals like they have this year, but I think, they weren't playing as aggressively as they have in other matches, which I think was smart because that's how GWS tend to get you. So, it was just a very dour game. A lot of the game was spent in Adelaide's forward half. GWS to try grind it back, weren't very successful. And goal kicking, of course, was abysmal. Tex was the only multiple goal kicker for the entire match, and the teams went at 25% for Adelaide and 9.3% for Giants. Goals per inside 50. I looked at it, I think Giants had like 90 odd possessions per goal for the match, which is insane. And GWS only had 6 set shots, which they took 0 goals for from. So it was a very hard conditions, but GWS just weren't getting anything going as they lost 7-10, 52 Adelaide to 4-10, 34 GWS. Um, Only 3 out of the 14 scoring shots from GWS weren't from turnover score, which, as I sort of mentioned, is how GWS like to play this game when they're not getting it going. They try and rely on Adelaide turning the ball over and taking their moments. So, and there was a lot of opportunities. It was 81 to 86 intercepts apiece and 21 to 18 intercept marks recording. So, despite them having a lot of turnovers themselves, a few players Adelaide were very good at making sure those turnovers were far up the ground where they could set up afterwards. And they were very patient with their ball movement because we've seen them just burst from the halfback. But this was never going to work on it. GWS are very good at clamping on that. So I want to say, although it looks ugly, although Adelaide fans might be saying, yeah, this was a stupid, dumb match, I am actually fairly impressed with them. Are you still there, Blaze?
Oh, sorry, my mic was muted. I forgot. But no, you're
Okay.
completely right. Like it was, even though it was a dour affair, like not much really happened in this game. Like a win is a win. Adelaide proved that they are able to fight heavy and fight well in hard conditions, whereas the Giants just couldn't get anything going for them.
Yeah. And, as I said, I think for GWS, it was just really disappointing to see a lack of creativity in their ball movement. Like all their chains, were just, maybe like 2 or 3 minutes of uncontested back half movement to create a handball chain. And that all really just created a dump kick to space.
Hmm.
Like they were mucking around in the bar, just to blaze the ball away anyway. So, it is props for Adelaide to match up so defensively well against them. But,
Mm-hmm.
GWS, it just felt like they could, do a bit more. And, this was like and again, it's almost like a weird litmus test. And like, when Whitfield has like a really good game, but they don't score off the back half, it normally means that GWS have like played terribly.
Yeah.
And, again, I'm not using this to insult Lockie Whitfield, but, that's just sort of the way they play. Like, um, yeah, or even like Fremantle last year with Luke Ryan. You know what I mean? Like sometimes he was having like very high possessions in a very bad game.
Yeah.
Yeah, as I said, it's just, sort of the thing. A lot of GWS's top performance were in the back half. You know, a lot of marks taken, not much movement generated. It was just, a lot resulting into nothing.
Yeah, that's pretty much right. Jumping over to our individuals, I thought Alex Neil-Bullen did play his best game for Adelaide so far this year. He kicked a goal from 20 touches, 17 of them effective, equating to 85% efficiency, 9 contested possessions, 3 marks, 2 clearances, 24 pressure acts, and 8 ground ball gets. Captain Jordan Dawson, I think, put on some immense pressure, especially in that second half. He finished with 27 touches, 12 of them contested, 5 intercepts, 5 marks, 9 inside 50s, 5 clearances, 2 behinds, 5 score involvements, 8 tackles, 20 pressure acts, 8 ground ball gets, and 620 meters gained. We did note that he wasn't really playing the way that he normally did in that first half, but he definitely stepped it up towards that second half when it got a little bit more messier and you had to kind of put the pressure on a little bit more. Um, Underrated defender Nick Murray for the Crows, I thought was impressive. He collected 9 disposals, 8 of them effective, equating to 88.9% efficiency, 5 marks, 6.1%, 6 spoils. And then as for GWS, Sam Taylor, as per usual, was absolutely immense in their defense. He scavenged what he could and defended what he could. He finished with 20 touches, 19 of them effective, equating to 95% efficiency, 8 contested possessions, 10 intercepts, 11 marks, with 6 of them being intercept marks, 8 1%ers, 7 spoils, and 100% time on ground.
Yeah, and I must admit that is the other point, I guess, for GWS is like you take it as a good or bad thing. Like their defense really prevented this game from being atrociously abysmal.
Mm.
Like they went up pretty well. I don't know conditions were favoring that, but Adelaide did feel like, again, they weren't being as clinical. Like Adelaide were playing relatively safe. But you know what I mean? It's like they did set up a few options where it looked like they could generate a bit more, but GWS just shut it down. So you know what I mean? Like this could have been probably a lot worse for GWS. So I think, even though it was wet and scrappy, Adelaide did have a lot of control during the match. So
Yeah, that's exactly right. And unfortunately for Adelaide, they do lose Darcy Fogarty to a shoulder injury. He will be out for a couple of weeks for that. Hopefully, it's not too bad. Um, but yeah, it's not great timing for that injury to arise.
no, especially since Adelaide's been pretty much firing on all cylinders in the forward half of the game. So it's a bit of a shame while he's been having a pretty good season that he does get that knock. But
Yeah,
again, Adelaide's got so much tolls that they can afford to be a bit cautious as well. So, you know what I mean? Just take a couple of weeks, get it right. You never want persistent shoulder injuries with the toll forward. So, hopefully he'll be all ready and settled for when he comes back in a couple of weeks' time, which I think's around the showdown.
yeah, the
Not
showdown's
too
in a
sure.
couple of weeks, so he might be back by then. Who knows?
Yeah.
But
Yeah, could
as
be. Could
as for
be.
a different showdown known as currently the Damien Hardwick Cup, we will take a trip over to Marvel Stadium for the Saturday night clash between Richmond and the Gold Coast Suns.
And it was sort of funny how it happened again, with the result that was earlier, because another team, currently at the top of the ladder, got taken down a peg by the scrappy Tigers. But really, it was Gold Coast who were their own worst enemy. The ball lived in their forward half, but only managed a woefully inaccurate 3-11 from forward half scoring chains,
Mm-hmm.
and only 3 more shots from 20 extra inside 50s comparative to Richmond. So, yeah, as I said, they did actually think it was like peak 2024 Suns, where they were really middling. Um, and the Tigers defense just withheld from the Suns' lack of forward connection. As I said, probably stood taller than their collective heights. Lost and controlled more of the Suns' offense than I thought the Suns actually did.
It
And, it just sort of dictated the terms of the game.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. He
sorry,
was
were
he
you
was
about to
easily
say?
best on ground
Yeah.
by far.
Oh, by far. And you know what I mean? You felt like even when the Suns were getting back, you know what I mean? Like he was the person saying no
Yeah,
most of the time.
pretty
So
much.
yeah. On the other side of the ground, I thought Tom Lynch had by far his best game of the season.
Mm-hmm.
Set up Richmond to actually convert some of their entries from closer to goal. Despite only having half the amount of Gold Coast marks inside 50s, Richmond were able to generate more from set shots. So on the other side, Gold Coast really couldn't actually find their told targets. Six of their inside 50 marks for the round, which I think um, Richmond were about six. Maybe they scored seven. But yeah, so six of those were actually to the, I don't know whether you want to call him like a small tall forward or the tallest small forward in the competition. That is, of course, Ben Long.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of what is he, like a 182 player that plays like 190?
Yeah, something like
Um,
that.
maybe he's a bit tall. I'm not too sure. Um, but yeah, like he was very impressive. But a lot of those were like higher up, more link up marks. So Richmond was still smothering Gold Coast tolls all night despite this, and they were rebounding about 82% of Gold Coast entries. Which again, when they score 60, generate 60. I think it was 68 or whatever it was. Uh, yeah, it was very impressive. And I will say, the Gold Coast did get their uncontested game going, which usually suits them very well. But the Tigers were at least able to force them into taking less favorable kicks and just eking out that extra turnover.
Mm.
With the Suns' biggest bomb users for the Knights being a bit more turnover prone than they have been in other matches. And yeah, so back half movement was just extremely difficult for the Suns. Allowed a few forward half turnovers for Richmond to pounce on, even if it was very sporadic. And it wasn't until like the end of the game where the game sort of opened up where the Suns were actually able to penetrate a bit more. Um, it may be a bit of a blip, but last year we did see the Suns' ball movement dry up a lot last year when they couldn't get their outside game going.
Mm-hmm.
And with the line breaking Rioli kept very quiet, it might be like, I don't want to say like the poster way to defeat the Suns, but I think a few teams will know that, when you take away a bit of their run and carry, they tend to be a bit prone to just putting it long
Yeah.
or just, dinking around sideways. And that sort of just allowed pressure to build up on them. And in this case, it was just a bit too much, and Richmond ended up winning.
Yeah.
Not sure if I mentioned the score. It was 12-8-80 to 9-15-69. So the Tigers by 11.
And it was a very thrilling 11-point win. However, we did get a little bit concerning in
Mm.
that fourth quarter when they kicked three unanswered goals. We did kind of worry we were going to have a fourth quarter fade out, but thankfully we held on. We managed to keep the fight back, keep the pressure on, and yeah, I'm very happy that we came away with a win. It was very surprising to see Dan Riolo be kept quiet in that halfback. Like I didn't see him, pretty much didn't see him do anything all night. However, I did see Maurice Rioli do some stuff, and I was very impressed with him. Before I get into my
Mm.
other individuals, I do just want to shout out a couple of people. Tim Taranto, I thought had a great game. I thought Samson Ryan, who was the extra tall slash second ruck. I thought he had a fairly solid game when he wasn't actually doing the ruck work. When he had to come up against Jared Witz at the start of that fourth quarter, it was a little concerning because Mank was on the bench for so long. And then play went to the far side of the ground where he couldn't get access to the bench. So Nank just couldn't be on the ground for a solid 10 minutes, which was a little rough. Borny came back on, everything kind of folded back into place. But otherwise, I was very happy with Samson Ryan's
Yeah.
performance. Sam Lawler, of course, phenomenal gameplay as per normal. Jonty Fall finally kicked his first goal in AFL footy. In fact, he kicked two, I think. If he might have kicked
Mm.
1-1, but still, he got his first.
No, one was overturned to a behind.
That's right. But he still got his first, so good for him. Steely Green was very solid, and yeah, I'm very happy with the production that the team is currently producing. Also, Hugo Ralsmith, I love Hugo very much. I've talked about him at length, and he also had another great performance. I'm looking forward to hopefully seeing them play this Thursday night when Anzac Eve is on. Because I will, not that I have said it yet, but I will be boots on ground for that game.
Nice.
Very exciting. But jumping over to my individuals now, as we talked just before, Nick Vlauston was best of field by far. He was an incredible pillar in defense, finishing with 27 disposals, 22 of them effective, equating to 81.5% efficiency, 10 contested possessions, 15 intercepts, 13 marks, 4 of them being contested marks, with 7 of them being intercept marks, 4 tackles, 8 pressure acts, 2 1%ers, 6 ground ball gets, 2 spoils, and 661 meters gained. Jacob Hopper was very solid in the middle this week. He collected 21 touches, 21 of them effective, equating to 77.8% efficiency. 12 contested possessions, 4 marks, 8 clearances behind, 6 score involvements, 8 pressure acts, and 8 crump gets. Maurice Rioli was an absolute pressure machine. He kicked a goal from 10 disposals, 8 contested possessions, 6 intercepts, 4 inside 50s, 7 tackles, 23 pressure acts, and 6 ground ball gets. I also want to briefly shout out Noah Bolter. You know, the whole legal issue with him. I'm letting the judicial system deal with that, but it was good to see him playing footy again. We know how good of a footballer he is, Premiership player for a reason. So yeah, just wanted to mention him. I thought he played well. Recruit John Noble for the Gold Coast Suns was always in the right spot in defense when he needed to be. He finished with 27 disposals, 22 of them effective, equating to 81.5% efficiency, 5 contested possessions, 12 intercepts, 10 marks, with 6 of them being intercept marks, 4 inside 50s, 3 score involvements, 3 tackles, 9 pressure acts, 521 meters gained. And then Ben Long, as you mentioned before, was leading goal scorer. Also, I found out his height. He is 186, so he probably plays more like a 192, 193. So it was pretty much the measurements you expected. He kicked 3-1 from 13 touches, 8 contested possessions, 11 marks, with 5 of them contested, 6 of them being inside 50, 5 inside 50s, 7 score involvements, and 14 pressure acts.
Yeah, and honestly, I must admit, with John Noble, and you're right, I thought he was actually intercepting fairly well, but you know what I mean? Like, a lot of his possessions, you know what is like, if you were to choose the two to distribute from half back, you would choose John Noble. You know what I mean? And again, I don't think it was Noble's fault. I think up the field, like there was a big drop off in the wingers' performances.
Yeah, I agree.
You know, even like someone like a Sam Flanders. You know, it was a very confusing night.
Yeah, when I was going through it, like
I know it's gone.
Flanders, Anderson, even Rao weren't really playing as they should have been playing.
Well, Rao was okay, but like I get what you mean with Anderson and all that. You know, again, it was sort of like link up and all that. But yeah, Flanders was just that confusing one where he's sort of dropped out of that midfield unit. Last year he was actually tracking on average to be one of the highest possession getters of the year. And you know what I mean? It's like this was like one of those things where I thought he could have gone off halfback. You know what I mean? Like he's played that position before. You know, Rioli's out of the contest. You know, maybe make that switch. But you know what I mean? It was like he goes forward, he kicks a goal, he does a couple of good things, but you know, it's just I don't know, a bit weird to me. Like it's not something that I would say is like a team problem or whatever. It's just I felt like in this game, yeah, as I said, they probably could have generated a bit more off halfback, you know, made a switch earlier, like a halftime thing. Whereas I said they just left their run too late. You know, the game did open up, but like you can say that against any young team. You know, the game's probably going to open up in the fourth quarter. But unless you start making that efforts early, you know, in a case like this, it was just a bit too much. Again, with Richmond's defense being fairly respectable as well. So it's not like Richmond were just going to like roll over and say, oh, we're a young team. We're just going to collapse now. You know, when you've got a team that's like trying everything not to lose, again, you just can't afford to have that much of a gap for so long in the game. And yeah, as I said, the Gold Coast, again, they were first on the ladder, but it's probably where the critics can say, you know, like a number one team on the ladder with that much possession just doesn't lose to these I don't want to say lesser teams, but you know, a team that does have exploitability like Richmond.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying you should like sell off your son's finals tickets or whatever. Like, I think this is just like a bit of a reality check. But it would just be interesting to see whether, this starts a fall off, starts exposing a few more, or whether the Suns can just go, yeah, we lost it. We've still got a lot of good things going on this year. Let's just continue on.
Yeah, that's how I think it's going to happen. Is that they're just going to probably bounce back. With the Q Clash coming up in a couple of weeks. In fact, I think it's 2 weeks. That'll
Mm.
be very interesting to see where both Brisbane and Gold Coast match up, considering where they both currently are in the season. But they still have another hurdle to face this upcoming week, which we'll talk about very soon. Shall we jump over to our first Sunday game, being being
Yeah,
your mob, going up
my mob.
against the Sydney Swans up at the SCG,
Yeah.
and it was a very interesting clash.
Interesting contest. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, I was at my cousin's 30th, so I only watched up to three-quarter time. Um, and I must admit, I was still feeling a bit nervous at three-quarter time, but you know what I mean? It very much felt like the week before, like Port Adelaide, from the start, a lot of defensive restriction, preventing ball movement, very good efforts manning up, as the Swans just look absolutely anemic going forward, partly due to their terrible disposal by foot.
Mm-hmm.
Some of their big players were making absolutely bad decisions, like Chad Warner. Corey had a few mistakes, but again, him being younger, you can give him a bit of a pass. Jake Lloyd, I thought, had a few horrible disposals. And yeah, they were just butchering the ball a bit at time. Blakey looked to be their best ball carrier, but unfortunately, couldn't convert some of his shots running off halfback. But, while this was going on, Radaglia, Aaliyah, and Bergman were left to absolutely feast in the back line,
Yeah,
and Port looked dominant. Uh, didn't get as much score from turnover as they probably could have. Um, but, they did really well. But the Swans, being a good team, they did muster up a last quarter domination. They controlled clearances, won the inside 50s by a lot. And we can't forget about the super sub, Aaron Francis, of all people, going in the forward line, scoring 3 goals, all in a row in the last quarter. But unfortunately for the Swans, he was the only one that was accurate. Swans kicked 5-8 in the last quarter. That poured off the hook a bit as they lost 10-7, 77. Oh, sorry, I should say 10-17, 77
mm-hmm.
to 13-7, 85 at the SCG. Swans not winning their all season so far. And I think also a part of this reason for the comeback was Port's inability to win the ground ball.
Mm-hmm.
So once Port stopped restricting the marking, stopped intercept marking, I should say, as fluidly, and more contests went to ground, and Sydney were able to just momentum their way back into the game. And as I said, Port were very lucky because in the last 10 minutes, they conceded 8 scoring shots.
Mm.
And although Port have been defensively good all year, again, this is sort of, I guess maybe that's what I sort of meant, like their midfield sort of, I wouldn't say let them down, because obviously Ollie Wines unfortunately had to go off for his heart condition.
Yes.
Normally, fingers crossed, it's only a 1 week thing. It's never normally more than that, but we'll talk about that a bit later. But really, it just shows how important Zach Butters is for his particular role in this midfield unit. He is by far our best stoppage winner. He's the only midfielder that consistently wins the ball at ground level. And even in this match, he even had more pressure acts than Willem Drew. He was on his hard nut tagging duties on Isaac Heaney.
Mm-hmm.
As a side note, apart from a couple of brilliant individual moments, he was a bit limited. Still played fantastically. Like, that's just Isaac Heaney being Isaac Heaney, but he was restricted. Willem Drew did a pretty good job there. So, you know what I mean? It was just, honestly, if this was a match where Zach Butters wasn't playing, and obviously they probably didn't get this big a lead, but you know what I mean? It felt like Port would have got run over.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously they didn't. They managed to hold on straight, get their season back on track. But as for Sydney, I feel like they have the core okay this year. Like they haven't been too far off in any particular game, but I feel like some of the magnets that they have, just haven't been that settled so far. McCartan in the forward line, it's sort of been very hit or miss.
Mm-hmm.
They might even be tempted to send him back and just put Francis in the forward line if his fourth quarter efforts were anything to go by. But I just feel like Gordon going down, like it's just been a very heavy rotation of players on the outside, which have just had very up and down results. Like they're a very kick heavy team, but without Gordon, their kicking percentage in ball movement has just gone down a bit. And I'm talking about players like Jake Lloyd, Corey Warner, Oliver Florent, Justin McInerney, and to a lesser degree, Hayward. I think he's been like the best player of that bunch on the list. He's had a pretty good year, but the rest of them have just been very patchy. So, you know what I mean? Like, it just feels like with those changes, like, I just feel they're very temperamental in their, what do you call it? Their consistency in scoring this year.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned, they've gone back to a very much more basic one-on-one style play, which does, go to more traditional style of movement. So they've been sort of playing in a style that needs these kicks to come off more. But in the end, it's just, a lot of rank turnovers or just dips in games that just, cause scoring to drop very quickly for them. So, well, I don't think, it's horrendous or that they're not going to get back. It's going to take a bit for them to find a bit of momentum without, as I said, Gordon on the outside. And I think they're going to have to, I don't know, either decide a personnel on the wing to just stay there, do specific roles, or just shift up with a few more handball chains, try and get outside to inside movement where they've got their damaging players, like your Heaney's, like your Warners, who did even get off the chain. When Warner got a few handball receives, he was actually sending the ball quite well inside 50. It just didn't really happen all that often enough. So, just a bit of variation I'd like to see from Sydney to make a long point short, I guess.
Yeah, that's a very fair assessment. Like we know Sydney are a good team. They have great pieces.
Mm.
It's just there seems to be like a very considerable drop off, which we have seen the past couple of weeks, pretty much since the start of the season, in terms of their output and I guess their quality of play. Part of it I think is still due to Goulden being out. Goulden has been a massive key to their movement. But they're just not firing. Papley as well. Papley up forward, they're missing him a lot. But there's just so much that I feel like it's either change. Either it's like a game style sort of thing because of the fact that they have a new coach, with Dean Cox, no more John Longmire. So maybe it's that sort of thing, or it's just the fact that they're just not on the park right now. I mean, granted, this was a close game.
Yeah.
But if it was for their, if it wasn't for their inaccuracies, like it could be a whole different story that we're telling here.
And it's sort of just a bit weird. Like, it's like they're very, as I said, they're going to their top forwards a lot more than they did last year. And again, still some fantastic goals from the midfield. Isaac Heaney, the couple of goals he scored were just clutch, small movements, take a shot, get it. Will Hayward, to a lesser extent, he actually just did it from just hard running and good work, but you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
A good couple of goals from the outside. But you know what I mean? Like, it wasn't until the absolute banner was thrown in the works with Aaron Francis that sort of generated enough scoring for them, for their entries. So, yeah, it was just, it's a bit hard to see. And I know they don't have all their forward players, but you know what I mean? It's just like with Tom McCartan there doing not much. You know what I mean? It's like you can get him forward, but he just needs a lot more support than just Hayden McLean this week. He was just serviceable. You know what I mean? Like he was a lot better in the ruck, but his ball use was absolutely atrocious, and obviously his goal kicking really let him down. So yeah,
that's exactly right.
Presented well, but you know what I mean? It's just yeah.
They're still trying to figure out, like, is having McCartan up forward the right move? Is having McCartan in defence the right move? That people still have so many opinions about it. I don't know if Cox is still really decided on where he needs him, but that's, maybe it's a detriment to the fact that they're moving him around so often.
Yeah, exactly. It's just consistency is like the main thing we're not seeing from Sydney.
Yeah, exactly right. Jumping over to our individuals, Zach Butters, as we mentioned before, he was absolutely immense. Such a difference maker. He finished with 27 disposals, 23 of them effective, equating to 85.2% efficiency, 17 contested possessions, 8 intercepts, 5 marks, with 3 of them being intercept marks, 5 inside 50, 7 clearances, 6 score involvements, 8 tackles, with 3 of them being inside 50, 37 pressure acts, and 10 ground ball gets. Willie Rioli was the leading scorer for them, kicking 3-1 from 14 touches, 10 of them effective, equating to 71.4% efficiency, 4 contested possessions, 7 marks, 3 clearances, 8 score involvements, and 15 pressure acts. Then Aliir, as you did mention before, he was very impressive in defence. He collected 16 disposals, 15 of them effective, equating to 95.8% efficiency. Sorry, 93.8% efficiency. 7 contested possessions, 9 intercepts, 5 marks, with 3 of them being intercept marks, 8 pressure acts, 3 on percenters, 3 spoils, 445 metres gained, and 100% time on ground. As for Sydney, Brody Grundy went out in the ruck battle. He got 32 hitouts, with 11 of them to advantage, and 26 touches, 17 contested possessions, 7 intercepts, 5 inside 50s, 9 clearances, 4 score involvements, 3 tackles, with 2 of them being inside 50, 7 pressure acts, 5 1 percenters, 13 ground ball gets, and 5 spoils. And then Matt Roberts was fairly prolific, especially in that final quarter fight back. He finished with 30 disposals, 22 of them effective, equating to 73.3% efficiency, 10 contested possessions, 11 intercepts, 6 marks, 4 inside 50s, a behind, 9 score involvements, 10 pressure acts, 9 ground ball gets, and 598 meters gained.
Yeah, as I said, it was as if Sydney didn't have that many performers. Even in their first half, as I said, it was more just ball movement. So, yeah, as I said, some good showings. I still feel like it felt like deserved to win more just through influence and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, they probably should have.
But geez, it was very, very touch and go. Like, at the end of the day, you could have, with conversion, you could have made the case for Sydney winning, even Port Adelaide. Shout out to Mitch Georgiadis too, again, going dead-eye from the boundary. I didn't actually think the Pelican did that bad a job at defending him. You just let him lead wide. He's very dangerous at leading, but that's still the shot you wanted him to take because they're low percentage shots. He just nailed all of them. So not much you can do.
No, he was accurate, which is, especially from that far out, which is very, very solid for him. As for injuries, Joe Richards was out late with an illness, so he was a late change. And then Ollie Wines, as you mentioned before, subbed out with his heart condition.
Yeah, which of course brought in Rory Atkins for his debut game. Started as a sub. Honestly, he didn't do that badly when he came on. Again, I only saw his efforts in the third quarter, but, wasn't doing too much, just providing a bit of link up. Pretty much what you would expect from Rory Atkins at this point, but, at least, as a Port fan, you might think he's a reliable player if he's ever called upon again, just, when you're having to go on for Ollie Wines very early in the match, it's good to see that at least it wasn't to a pure detriment. At least it was enough to where we could shuffle around. Obviously, Connor Rosie sort of took a few more centre bounces when Wines was out. So, still looks a lot more comfortable at half back. is definitely a player that prefers that extra time and space. But yeah, as I said, still had a very solid game too, Rosie.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's jump over to our last Sunday match at Marvel Stadium. It is the Western Bulldogs and St Kilda.
Probably the hardest one I have to report on because, again, it's been a bit of a shame for the Bulldogs. They've seemed to be only getting honourable losses and Pyrrhic victories.
Hmm.
But for them, it was such an important win for the context of this season. And this was honestly one of the biggest midfield dominances performances we'll see this year. The Saints got absolutely slaughtered at the stoppage contest, resulting in a 38 inside 50 differential. The Saints only recorded 31 inside 50s for the matches. So if you do the math, it was 69 inside 50s for the Doggies. Very nice. And that actually takes the mantle off West Coast, who unfortunately held the top 3 spots for least inside 50s in a match. So West Coast fans, you may not have got a win, but you have got this minor victory, I suppose. They were smashed all over the ground. It was a case that of a team that just couldn't do anything to stop the Bulldogs' ball movement, as they were only getting deep forward entries late. I should say St Kilda were only getting deep forward entries very late in the contest, despite their early lead, which really just came from a really nice conversion. Obviously, the biggest news is probably the absolute feasting by the Bonk coming back in, but it wasn't just his individual performance. It was, I think, the first few weeks not having him sort of set up the synergy that allowed him to go big straight away. Normally, with the Bulldogs' lack of distributing forward options, the Bonds sort of get stuck trying to go forward to win the game. But today, we saw a free range Bontempelli who was just allowing his teammates to come in, fill the gaps whenever he was, either going inside or outside the midfield. And they were pretty much firing on all cylinders. Matt Kennedy sort of just did what Bontempelli is sometimes asked to do as like that mid-forward link-up. Sam Davidson, again, not really like an inside sort of midfielder, playing on the outside, patching up any sort of thing. So it just led to such a comprehensive victory in there. And obviously, I think Ed Richards had an absolutely fantastic game. I think Liberatore too. Was very good. Like it was pretty much all Bulldogs in that regard. And of course Joel Freer too, getting more inside midfield moments and took absolute control of them. I was only watching off stats, mind you, but you know, just looking at it, it was quite the discrepancy, when you compare it to St Kilda, which pretty much McRae as a one-man island. And you really just saw the Saints throwing back to a bit of poor form and structure they had in 2024, where even Steele couldn't really get it going. I'm not sure if Jack Sinclair spent much time in the middle, but even at halfback distribution, we didn't really see as much of him as other times. And it was just, really not much going for anything,
Yeah, that's right.
Cam Wilkie had a good game, but again, as a defender, with the ball living so much down there, it was really sort of just the best you were doing rather than like a very impactful game for your side.
Yeah, that's right. I watched this game pretty much in full. Although I did only listen to the last quarter on radio, because again I was at my parents', so I was heading home as that happened. But yeah, like it was pretty much McRae kind of on his own doing the best that he could. It was a very, very struggling midfield, with a couple of highs, but it was just all Bulldogs all the way. Even Jason Johannesson, had a really solid game considering he's been really struggling to break back into the side due to injury, for a long time. So he's been back. He's been fit and firing and back for a couple of weeks now. He's looking very solid. But with the Bontempelli, the Bond himself, he is the big talking point. Well, the other big talking point. We'll get to the second one in a minute. Um,
Mhm.
He is a huge talking point from this game, and he is my number one individual player, being the captain himself. His return from injury is absolutely prolific. He kicked 2 goals, one from 30 disposals, 26 of them effective, equating to 86.7% efficiency, 12 contested possessions, 5 marks, 5 inside 50s, 8 clearances, 2 goal assists, 12 core involvements, 4 tackles, 14 pressure acts, and 9 ground ball gets. I thought Riley Sanders was everywhere he needed to be. He kicked 1-1 from 32 touches, 29 of them effective, equating to 90.6% efficiency, 4 contested possessions, 11 marks, 3 inside 50s, 14 score involvements, 4 tackles, and 12 ground ball gets. And then young defender James O'Donnell, I thought he stood very tall down back, finished with 13 disposals, 11 of them effective, equating to 84.6% efficiency, 4 intercepts, 5 marks, 3 score involvements, 7 pressure acts, 4 1%ers, and 4 spoils. As for the Saints, Jack Higgins was leading goal scorer for them, or leading scorer overall, I should say. He kicked 3-2 from 12 touches, 8 contested possessions, 6 score involvements, 6 tackles, 15 pressure acts, 2 1%ers, and 6 scramble gets. Then Hugo Garcia put on a lot of pressure in the midfield where he could. I think he might have had a tagging role, but I'm not 100% sure on that. He collected 16 disposals, 7 contested possessions, 2 clearances, a behind, 3 score involvements, 10 tackles, 30 pressure acts, and 4 ground ball gets.
Yeah, and honestly, I guess this is going to lead into the next point, but as good it was to see James O'Donnell get a chance to play defense again, which I'm pretty sure is his preferred decision. He's unfortunately probably going to go back into the forward line due to the point that you're just about to make, which is, of course, about Sam Darcy, one of the most informed
Yeah.
comps in the competition. In terms of ranking points, he's up there with Riley Philthorpe as by far and above away the best key forward in the competition of the last few weeks.
Mm-hmm.
But we've got some very sad news on that front. Maybe with the silver lining, depending on how you want to look at it.
Yes, so it was a hyperextension or a very, very awkward landing in a marking contest. He went down immediately. I believe this was late in the second or like early in the third, off the top of my head. I do remember watching it. I just can't remember which quarter it was. It was very, very dreadful news. It looked for the worst, but reports came out this morning that it was not an ACL. Thank the Lord. He will still be out. He's still going to require surgery. So he will still miss a couple of months. He's looking to come back. I think estimations it'll be dependent on how he looks post surgery. But it's looking likely he could be back around July, at the latest. But that is a remains to be seen over until the next week or two when we find out how it's going on the medical
Yeah.
side of things.
So for July, it would be roughly a month and a half. Well, a month, basically a month, because the Bulldogs will have another bye during that point, with all teams having their extra bye sort of thing.
Yeah, so he
The
should be
mid-season
back.
ones.
Estimation I think is should be back around like a month or two before finals. That's at least the hope. But that's yeah, it's currently
Hmm.
remains to be seen. So it sucks straight up. It sucks for them, but
Yeah.
hopefully they can make do. Like we saw, I saw in that second half, especially in that third quarter, they had Buku Kamas up forward. Rory Lobb ended up floating up forward again. So
Yeah.
they have a couple of options at the very least. Like that, the benefits of Rory Lobb is that he was originally a forward. So you could go end up just slotting back
Yeah.
into that position, but they have a couple of options, and hopefully they can figure it out.
Hmm. Unfortunately for the Bulldogs, it's like a lot of their forward options are the very definition of mercurial. Like, Aaron Norton theoretically could kick 6 goals every match, but will probably split that evenly. Or he did that match, 3 goals, 3. Rory Lobb, if like for Fremantle, which is, the last point. I can't even remember the few forward games he played for Bulldogs, but you know what I mean? Like he would have some days where he would absolutely dominate. But it just wasn't worth the 3 or 4 games where he would do nothing. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. Again, if the Bulldogs can get that forward half game going, it's not going to matter all that much. They can just outmuscle opponents. Like they've got the ability to do so. It's just a real shame that they can't just win it. I mean, they can obviously win it, but you know what I mean is like more and more options get taken away from them this season.
Mm-hmm.
They're fighting well despite it. They've done well to get into the pack, but yeah, it's just tough for them this year. It's a bit of a shame too because I think they've performed better than I thought they naturally would. But yeah, it's just
Yeah,
just feels like it might overwhelm them at some point.
yeah, I definitely think they're still missing like a piece or two that they like kind of really require to help repel some of the harder pressure that may come upon them, like the Bulldogs did to them this game.
Mm.
So they're not exactly where they need to be just yet. They definitely have good pieces, like we talked about that at like that we have. They have some really solid players. It's just it might just be some more ups and downs for St Kilda until I can finally get to the point that they want to be at.
Yeah, well, as I said, the flip side with St Kilda is just, as I said, they honestly, it's just such a weird step back because they've been so competitive. They've found ways, and I guess when you are relying, as I mentioned last week, it did feel like they were a bit opportunistic, with the Bulldogs restricting options by possession. You know what I mean? Like that just dries up. So
Yeah.
you're left with not scoring that much, and that's what I meant like last week, where even though I have been jokingly floating the Max King is actually a detriment to their team. Um, this is like, I think, maybe not proof to why they need him back, because obviously they didn't get enough entries anyway, but you know what I mean? Like, if you had Max King there, you're like more likely to try and bring someone like a Mason Wood, who
Mm-hmm.
wasn't really evolved up the ground, try and get a few more variations to a midfield that just wasn't moving the ball all that much.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Like they're just missing like they have Mitch Owens, and Mitch Owens does a lot of work up there. He's very, very good. But they're just kind of missing
Mm,
the more central tall forward, which is what Max King is meant to be. Like they have Cooper Sharman up there as well, but he just
mm.
doesn't play in the right position that a Max King would kind of play in.
Yeah, he's sort of. I'll say about Cooper Sharman is like he's getting into a pretty solid mark, but he's not as big a leader. You know what I mean? Like often when he marks, it feels like he's doing it more off his athleticism than he is from hard forward leading patterns. I don't want to like make it seem like he's lazy or anything, but it just limits the opportunities. And again, there's no way I would judge him, and I'm not even judging him from this game because I didn't see him. This is just my overall impressions of him. Um, but yeah, so that's sort of why they need that sort of player. And it's like the flip side is they've been doing really well without it. But
Mm.
as I said, um, and again, this game where it wasn't really their main problem, but um, on the flip side, you know what I mean? It's just something where, when your outside is shut off, you're not even going to come anywhere near with the forward line that they have. They go 856, 16 scoring shots from what was it, 31, 32 inside 50s, That wasn't actually that bad. That's a set shot every 50. It's just, as I said, if you're going to have that much limited, you need more firepower. So,
Yeah, not to
you know,
mention that this is their second loss in a row at the moment after having play against Adelaide in Adelaide last week. They played obviously the Bulldogs this week. We will touch on in a moment who they go up against for Anzac round. But yeah, like this is hopefully it won't be too concerning for St Kilda and that they'll be able to kind of wait. No, hang on. They played Port Adelaide last week, didn't they? They played someone.
that was the last week. That was 2 weeks ago.
Oh yeah,
They played GWS last week and got flogged in the third
that's
quarter, but
right.
otherwise played pretty well.
I couldn't remember. Oh yeah, because they had to stay in Adelaide a week. That was the whole
Yeah,
Jack
yeah,
Higgins
yeah,
comment. That's right. I knew they played both Adelaide teams at
yeah,
this point, but I couldn't remember which order it was. But yeah,
yeah,
so this is the second loss in a row. So it's a little concerning. But they hopefully will be able to bounce back. Again, Max and still not having Max King doesn't help them all that much, but we know that they have
yeah.
enough pieces to where they can produce good quality football. It's just about making sure they don't get nullified in the areas that they are specializing in.
Well, I wouldn't say they have enough pieces. Like, they obviously don't have enough depth. Um, and their depth is a bit spread thin at the moment. But you know what I mean? Like, they seem to have found some moments of click. And it's about setting up a game style where they can, get those moments clicking enough to at least challenge. And it just feels like, yeah, there's certain games where they can get that going, and there's certain games that couldn't. And obviously, this was a game where they flat out couldn't. So, yeah, it's a bit of a shame.
Yeah, it's very unlucky for them. But what we can say is for the doggies at least, they look quality, and
Yeah,
it's
I
only
said
it's only
definitely a
up,
bit better than
especially with
them.
the Bont back in. They look so much better with the Bont with him in. He does
Mm.
so much for them. He's like captain, brilliant leadership qualities that just elevates the team in its entirety. And losing Sam Darcy does suck, but him being back is so important to this team.
Yeah, because it's not like the Bulldogs have ever done. Well, so sorry, I should say the Bulldogs have actually done pretty well without a Sam Darcy in their forward line. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying they can afford it, but as I said, it's not a style that necessarily needs a key forward. It's just having a key forward when they're restricted just gets them enough, uh, you know, vanilla sort of conversion to make them a bit more rounded. Whereas, as I said, you might see a bit of feast of famine now without Darcy if other teams can nullify that midfield, but
Mm-hmm.
when it's still going, they're one of the more dangerous teams in the competition.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Speaking of two teams that are very, very dangerous to the competition, the Easter Monday game that was on as we were recording this has just finished, so we'll kind of freehand kind of go over it. Geelong and Hawthorn at the MCG, the traditional Easter Monday clash. And as you can see by the worm here, it was a very, very, very back and forth affair, very, very close, right up until the very end. It was by a point at like 5 minutes left in the quarter. I had it on my phone. But the scoreline being 12-14, 86 to 11-13, 79. These teams match up on each other extremely well, despite the fact that Geelong managed to get a pretty solid lead out in that second quarter. But these are from what we've seen in the past couple of weeks. Like we knew this is going to be a hard fought battle. There was a little bit of rain earlier in the day, so that probably didn't help conditions too much. But I think it dried up enough to where Geelong were able to get their game consistently going the entire time. But then Hawthorn were able to get their game going and had that massive fight back in the third quarter. Um, to kind of put it all on display, there were four goal kickers who had 3 goals apiece. Two on both teams. Sean Manor had kicked 3-2. Jack Dunstan kicked 3-1. Patrick Dangerfield kicked 3 goals. Muppi Ochol kicked 3-1. The Wizard, Nick Watson, kicked 2 goals. As for disposal leaders, Carl Amon finished with 29 touches. Bailey Smith, 28 touches. Jai Newcomb, 28 touches. Tom Atkins, 24 touches. There was a lot. There was clearly a lot going on, pretty much all over the ground. Bunch of players had intercepted possessions. Jack Dunstan had 8 marks. Scrimshaw and Connor McDonald also had 7 marks apiece. As for pressure wise, James Warple had 13 tackles, Jai Newcomb 10 tackles, Connor Nash 10 tackles. Pressure act numbers have not been released as of yet, as the game has just finished. But overall, looks like it would have been a very, very intense game.
Yeah, actually. Yeah, it was. I will say, Jack Dunstan, he did miss a couple of shots early, like his 3-goal one. In terms of X score, he missed two very easy, ungunston like from pretty big shanks. So, you know, I don't suppose say that's what cost him in like this small margin, but that was very unusual to see from what I saw in the first half. Because yeah, hopefully it doesn't come too through in the podcast, but apparently my phone was chewing up a bit too much data to record and watch this at the same time. But yeah, Geelong just looked really, really solid with handball chains. They were moving the ball excellently. Where the Hawks, sort of just coughed it up a bit by foot, a bit too, what do you call it? A bit too turnover prone. The Cats were just pouncing on that. Getting a lot of good forward entry marks as well. Oliver Dempsey was very good early. Shannon Neal provided a target, even if he didn't take that much. But yeah, it seems at the end of it, it was just a few players lifting up in distribution. Jai Newcomb, Carl Amon, as I said, was sort of lifting up. A few more clearance winners as well. I'm not sure exactly when they came, but Lloyd Meek, I'm assuming, was one of the more important things to stem that clearance loss tide. And yeah, as I said, it just seemed to be very back and forth. I will probably watch either the highlights or the replay. But yeah, as I said, that seems to be a pretty classic match. Yeah. Not too much I can say, but yeah, it's a very important game too, because unfortunately for Hawthorn, after getting undefeated, puts them back in the pack, whereas Geelong sort of getting back to where you would expect them to be. You know what I mean? Like,
they're back to contending.
Probably makes up for one of the. They're always contending, but you know what I mean? Is like it feels like they should comfortably be in the 8. It's just that one loss to St Kilda. Unfortunately, know a bit much about that myself, but it's yeah, as I said, and disgustingly, Collingwood's on top of the ladder.
I know.
This is awful.
I wasn't going to touch the ladder this week, but yeah, like Geelong now keeping up with Brisbane and with Collingwood. It's a tisk.
And I was talking so positively on them. Now that's ruined.
Now it's ruined because
ruined all my half, not really a goodwill, but you know what I mean, like begrudging respect that I had for them. Anyway.
Well, you know what? Since you brought it up, may as well touch on the ladder. Let me just swing it on over to here. I wasn't entirely prepared for this, but we'll touch on it now. So yes, as you can see, Collingwood is officially on top of the ladder with 20 points, alongside Brisbane, who are also on 20 points, who did get dropped down because obviously they lost to Collingwood. So, it was a 1 versus 2 sort of situation right there. The Gold Coast Suns, the GWS Giants, the Adelaide Crows, and Hawthorn all bring up top 6, each on 16 points, only separated by percentage. Percentage game-wise, it's pretty interesting to look at. Gold Coast with the highest percentage.
Also, you need to put it on live, because Geelong should be 16 as well now.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I can change that later. That's fine. Whatever. Yes, Geelong should be on 16. So, and they have a higher percentage, so Geelong should actually be in 6th position. Ignore that. But otherwise, percentage-wise, Gold Coast Suns currently have the lead with 150.5, with a couple of teams being Collingwood, GWS, Adelaide, and Geelong, in about between 130 and 136 range. So it's percentage-wise, it's still very close. Points-wise, it's also very close. There's still a game in it, pretty much between all those teams in the 8. The only other team in the 8 that is not on 16 points is the Western Bulldogs. They're sitting on 12. Below the top 8 is Fremantle, Port Adelaide, Essendon, and St Kilda, each on 12 points. Carlton, Sydney, and Richmond, each on 8 points. Richmond being the top of the bottom 4, currently sitting 15th. And then we have North Melbourne, and Melbourne on 4 points, having only won 1 game each now. And West Coast still bringing up the rear with no wins.
It is a bit funny to see the 8-win teams because you've got Carlton, 8 wins, 122.1 percentage. Sydney, 8, 101 percentage. Richmond, 8, 65.7 percentage. Second lowest in the competition. So, it's just really weird. But it's probably bad news for North and West Coast, as I said. Like, there's not too many teams that are... a lot of the 1-win teams got a second win. So, you know what I mean? It's, they're going to have to find some wins soon because, the competition's trailing. Yeah. Like, I know West Coast is just going to stay around the bottom, but for North and Melbourne, who wanted to probably move a few spaces up, they're going to have to work a bit extra harder. And, as I said, Richmond, at where they were last year. 2 wins on the board.
Yeah, and getting that done within the first 6 weeks, no one expected that. And
Yeah,
what's even
absolutely.
crazier
So
is that I was looking at the fixture ahead, not just for not for just for the preview that we're about to do, and we have a couple of very winnable games coming up. Like
yeah,
we've got Melbourne this Thursday night, as we've just mentioned, Anzac Eve, the traditional Anzac Eve match. That's very winnable. Although with Melbourne's performance against Fremantle, that'll make it a little bit more difficult. Um, then we have North Melbourne, I believe, or West Coast. It's one of the two. But we play both of them the next couple of weeks. I think it's actually West Coast first. No, math in my head. No, I think it is. I think it is North. No, actually, I'm very incorrect. I'm sorry about that.
no, you're versing
It's Melbourne
Hawthorn
and
in
then
round 8.
Hawthorn, and then I think it's West Coast, then North, and then
West
Essendon.
Coast, yeah.
So like out of those 5 games, at least 3 of them are winnable. Like Essendon could
And
go
look,
either
even
way,
Hawthorn haven't won zero.
and
Essendon haven't.
Hawthorn
Hawthorn
should
haven't
win.
won their last 2. So who knows?
I don't know.
Maybe their streak
Yeah,
will continue.
Hawthorn are gonna destroy.
Yeah.
I think Hawthorn will destroy us. They're a much better team than we are.
Probably.
But then again,
I
we
think
did
so.
surprise the Suns, but the Suns were also extremely
Mm.
inaccurate and kicked themselves out of it. So,
Yeah.
but
Yeah,
anyway,
a bit of a known West enemy, but yeah.
let's
I'll go through them.
jump over
Starting with
to the fixture. And as I just mentioned, Anzac Eve, the traditional Anzac Eve clash between Melbourne and Richmond at the MCG. I will be there because it's not a home game. I will be up on level 4, enjoying it with everyone else who's stuck on level 4.
the
but
nosebleeds.
I'm looking forward to it. It's always a good clash. With Melbourne spinning against Freo, it definitely kind of lines them up to a little bit more of what we expected out of them this year. They were obviously we weren't expecting them to be kind of as dreary and as dreadful as they have shown. But their performance against Fremantle showed that they still have some fight and they're still definitely willing to fight their way back into where they should be. As for us, again, I just want to see a competitive game. I just want to see us, fight hard as we normally do, and hopefully we can surprise them as well and maybe get another win under the board.
I think the most interesting thing will be the team lineup, specifically for Melbourne. Well, not at all for Richmond, because as I said, they're just going to be playing who they think's the best. But we saw Melbourne without that many tolls. Obviously, they dropped Van Ruin and Fritsch. Sorry, I think Van Ruin might have been injury. I think Fritsch was just a dropping.
Possibly, yeah.
But yeah, either way, yeah, as I said, they've got options to bring in some tolls, but the way Richmond played against the Suns, I'd almost be tempted to run small ball again. And of course, their defense, obviously, normally is a big issue against Richmond. You only really have to target Tom Lynch, and Tom McDonald's more than capable of doing that. So I don't think that's going to be held against him. That's why I'm pretty sure that Melbourne will get the job done. As I said, their weaknesses this year don't tend to line up towards Richmond's strengths, so to speak. So I think Richmond, as I said, I reckon this could be like a scrappy game, but I could imagine Melbourne fairly comfortably winning the territory battle enough to win this game. So, yeah, as I said, Richmond could win if Melbourne's like really inaccurate. Take notice of their opportunities, but yeah, as I said, I just would tip Melbourne by a modest margin.
Yeah, I think it's definitely safer bet to give it to Melbourne. However, again, I just want to see a competitive game, see a strong game. Again, both teams are coming off of a 5-day break. Both teams played on Saturday. But I think because both matches were also very hard fought. This could just be more of a low scoring sort of game because bodies might still be sore from the games prior. But we shall see. Let's jump over to the traditional Anzac Day clash now, between Collingwood and Essendon.
Yeah, well, on paper, Collingwood should be a bit of a shoe-in for this match, but as we all know, Anzac games have been very close in the last few, and even just back-to-back last year, you had Essendon winning one of them and the other one being a draw.
Mm-hmm.
That was just for the two contests. So, it's one of those things where I do like obviously backing Collingwood. I think they're going to be a bit too. I think they have enough versatility in their forward line now to where I think Essendon won't be able to manage. Like this is where a game where having Dan McStay now when your forward line makes Essendon more exposed. Because as I said, Essendon's defense is really just nullify one forward and then you're struggling,
Yeah.
sort of thing. Collingwood, obviously, pretty good. Good handball chain team as well. So I think both will try and work it out the centre fast.
Mm-hmm.
I just think Collingwood probably have a bit more better movement options in halfback. Essendon require the ball going forward a bit before they can really lock in. So it's really just avenues. I wouldn't be surprised if it's close, but I just think Collingwood should have a bit more options to at least get forward, even if it is a close match.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think this is again a shoe-in for Collingwood. Especially with Essendon's loss of their key ruck, having to rely now on Goldstein to come back in. Obviously, Darcy Cameron should pretty much just wipe the floor. I'm not going to lie to you. But hopefully Essendon make it
Maybe I
competitive.
think it's
But
around the ground where Darcy Cameron's more dangerous because Goldstein isn't a running ruck.
no,
Like he's well past it. So honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if Nate Caddy, sort of, like if Goldstein rested forward a lot more, you know what I mean? Like if it was a lot more headed towards a 50-50 split in rucking, and Nate Caddy just goes with him just to provide that run with role. Because
yeah,
again, I think if you just run Goldstein with him, like, he's going to end up with 10 marks for the game and a bit of damage, Darcy Cameron. So,
yeah, that's right.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, like this, it'd be nice to see Essendon make it competitive, but I expect Collingwood to win that pretty convincingly. Let's jump over to the West, where Freo will host Adelaide at Optus, and this could genuinely go either way.
It's just sort of, I guess, two teams with very good forward line efficiency. It's just, I don't know, like on paper, I think Adelaide should have it easily. Like, if it was just two teams, you know what I mean?
Mm.
But I don't know. There's just something about Freo where I can see enough from them if they can get their game going. And, being an Optus, they should be able to get over the line. But I think I might edge short Adelaide. Like, again, they showed even in a grind match, they can present fairly well. Freo, again, rely a lot on their tall forwards, but Adelaide have the run with defenders.
Mm-hmm.
And, with them not getting a lot of stoppage play, them not getting a lot of general play shots, if they can just keep Shy Bolton quiet enough, keep Frederick quiet enough, I think it's going to be very hard for Fremantle to score. And Fremantle, with their defence looking as bad as it did last week, still has to deal with a Thilthorpe, Tex Walker
Mm-hmm.
forward line.
Yeah,
Assuming Tex travels, but if you think Fogarty's not playing, you sort of have to play him for the next couple of weeks. Maybe rest him another day later in the season. So, yeah, I mean, maybe if the outside run gets exposed a bit for Adelaide, I think Fremantle might be able to move the ball a bit, but it would take a bit of a lift up for Fremantle. I think the midfield's going to be their only real consistent avenue to win, and I'm just a bit skeptical.
yeah, no, I completely agree. The loss of Fogarty definitely has not helped them in that regard either. Um, I think Freo, yeah, if Freo are able to keep Bolton and Frederick alive, or able to keep them moving, hopefully get some more out of Hayden Young after he was very quiet last week. Give as long as they're providing enough to their forwards, especially to Josh Tracy, and he has his kicking boots on, of course. Then they should. Honestly, I think they will be very extremely threatening. Because as much as I really do rate Adelaide's defense, and I know you do as well, we've talked about them at length much earlier when we were doing kind of overall team rankings. I think Tracy will be able to pretty much just get out and do whatever he wants to do because he is just that good right now.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think Amos provides enough. I think Adelaide will be able to run a spare man fairly easily. I just think, yeah, I think there's a bit more flexibility just coming from Fremantle's forward line not firing. And as I mentioned, Oscar McDonald did all right, but it's definitely just a placeholder. Like, I would still prefer Voss
Yeah.
at this point in time. And yeah, as I said, it's going to be a bit of an interesting ruck battle as well. Darcy versus Riley O'Brien. Um, Darcy still yet to find his feet versus Riley O'Brien, who's definitely a bit lumbering, but did very well last week. So, as I said, there may be a few other avenues they could expose around the ground. But yeah, as I said, I just think Adelaide's got enough to nullify. My opinion.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. But it's a 50-50 tip for me. Again, it might depend on ins and outs as well. Because they could make some wholesale changes. Who knows? All right, let's jump over to the Saturday matches, starting with St Kilda and Brisbane at Marvel Stadium. Brisbane don't have the greatest track record at Marvel, but I don't think it'll be an issue this time around.
Yeah, it's like how much you want to call last week an aberration. Because, as I said, if you say, St Kilda, if their midfield plays like they did last week, they're going to get absolutely slaughtered. But then also Brisbane's midfield weren't that great last week either. So, but yeah, St Kilda still struggle with the tolls. And if Brisbane can just get a few going, even if it is a bit nullified, I think they'll still be able to just get a few more goals more than St Kilda. I do think St Kilda's forward line actually matches up okay. Like, if I was to pick a weakness, it would be St Kilda at ground level.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's one of those things where I think just Brisbane enough options. I think where Saints could get a bit of a kick up is run on the outside. Brisbane do have a lot of exciting players, but they're a bit more forward runners than back half runners. So if someone like a Bradley Hill, Nasiah Wangani Malira, or I know he was subbed off halfway through after not having much impact, but if Henry is just, working towards a good game, this might be a good time to have it, assuming he doesn't get dropped. So, yeah, it's going to be a bit interesting. I think it's more going to be scrappy than close, but yeah, I'll say Brisbane have a fair chance, but there are a few avenues where I could see St Kilda nabbing this one.
Yeah, I agree. If even if they don't, it'd be nice to at least see it competitive and see it close. But I think Brisbane have more of the clearer shot, clearer just team structure, and very well built otherwise to be able to take St Kilda on.
Yeah.
All right, jumping over to the match over at the Adelaide Oval next. It's Port Adelaide hosting North Melbourne.
Yeah, well, this is one where Port Adelaide can't afford another shock loss. Just got their season back on track, but again, matchup, you're still tracking fairly well. I think the most damaging threat to Port Adelaide is Paul Curtis. He's having a fantastic season. Port Adelaide struggle with Smalls. Toll-wise, I think Port Adelaide can deal with Darling and Larkey, Zerha to a lesser degree. All have matchups. They should be all right. But yeah, as I said, the midfield battle, if North are just going to get rolled over in the midfield, not apply enough pressure, we've seen how Port do against poor tackling teams. They tend to rip them to shreds. So, you know what I mean? It's like, it's hard because a few times I've said that, the other teams then like come out firing in that regard, showed Port up. But I will say, if North don't get the tackle contest close, yeah, it should be very simple for Port. But on the flip side, that is the avenue where they could win.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you want to expect Port to just wipe the floor with North Melbourne, but again, as you said, Paul Curtis, dangerous threat up forward, and Port, does struggle with dealing with those small forwards. He could be I don't think he'll be a huge difference maker, especially because the midfield battle is going to be where the interesting part sort of lays, especially with Butters and Rosie just completely dominating as they have been. I want to hope that North can make it competitive, but I kind of just don't really see it happening.
Yeah, well, it's like, again, Ollie Lord has shown that he can be good in patches. Had a very quiet game last game. I did presented well, okay, in the first quarter, just it wasn't quite his. But against North defense, I think he's someone that can really lift, provide a few extra options because he looks like he's going to be the more direct in front sort of lead. As I said, Georgiadis just loves to go wide. So again, if Lord can get like a few easy set shots in front, they should be able to get going as well. But yeah, as I said, for North, it's just going to be tackling pressure, relying on Port to be a bit crap, and getting a turnover game going.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, jumping over to Canberra, where at Manuka Oval, the Giants will host the Bulldogs.
Yeah, Giants being favourites in this game despite the polar opposites in performance last week. And honestly, I think that's a bit unfair because I think the Bulldogs, it's sort of hard because they're not a good back half movement team. So this isn't a good matchup for them. Because again, if they turn it over in their back half, the Giants will tend to like to pounce on it. And if they don't do that, they'd get the wood over them. But in the last two matchups, they went back to head-to-head last year, and despite the Giants winning top four, the Bulldogs won fairly comfortably. Last year, that was the match where Bulldogs did score 8 goals, 22.
True.
I just remembered seeing from that the state of that round. So it'll be a very interesting one. Maybe matchups the Bulldogs are actually a bit more competitive than you think. Obviously, they're not going to have Trelaw. They're not going to have, a few of their other players still. But with a bump back, you've got to give them half a chance. But obviously, Sam Darcy's just it's a bit of a souring one. You wonder if it might affect team morale, might make them a bit slow out the gate. But yeah, not sure. I think the biggest thing is about the Bulldogs is preventing enough entries for the Giants. Because if you think Hogan gets back, again, the Bulldogs are more preventing entries to make their defense better than actually being a solid defensive side. So I would say this is a coin flip. And, if the Bulldogs can keep the Giants under, let's say, 45 entries, I think they'll win.
Yep.
But if it's over, they might lose. Again, weird prediction of the round. Although, watching the match timeline, last week's weird prediction of, despite it being a close match, I reckon at some point Geelong will get 20 in front. That went to fruition.
That did.
So maybe I'm onto something.
You were correct with that one.
So I don't know how. Say enough things, a few things are correct, but
I mean, yeah, I could genuinely see this game going either way. Again, up in Canberra, it's going to be cold, as it normally is whenever they play up in Canberra. I want the Doggies to win personally, but I think the Giants, provided Hogan is back, will probably make a lot of the major difference up there.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, as I said, it's really how the midfields match up for me. I think even with Hogan and all that, again, Bulldogs can get a bit restrictive, but at the same time, the Bulldogs have to go from their halfback. The Giants have, a fairly big option. So I think, honestly, I could just see one team dunking on the other. It just depends how the matchup goes, sort of thing. Which team can get their game going. But yeah, it's just once one team gets their game going, it's going to be very hard for the other team.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like I said, it's a very 50-50 game, and it's going to be that who fires first, and if the other team can fire back.
Yeah.
All right, jumping over to our Sunday games, the Gold Coast Suns host the Sydney Swans up on the Gold Coast.
Yeah, another interesting one. Sydney, again, despite losing the last couple of games. One of them not very impressively. The other one, sort of a bit more respectively. They're going to have to need a win this one. I'm not saying they are or aren't, but this is for them, it feels like they need to put a bit more of a stamp on this season. They've had a lot of half efforts. They've had a lot of almost. And for the Suns, again, rebounding after that loss, a shock victory. A shock loss. They're going to want to stand tall. So hopefully it gets these two teams firing. In terms of matchups, it's very hard because, again, both teams like to generate a lot of score from their midfield. Both from their outside midfield like to also get a few goals, but can be defensively stopped. So, for me, I think if one team can just get the matchups right, I think it will very much benefit them. And obviously with Sydney, a lot of that will come in defense because, you've got Blakey who can sort of run with. You've got Melican who's going to take the biggest key. But after that, you're sort of exposing yourself. You're going to have to put a runner on Ben Long. You're going to have to decide who goes on King. I think that will probably be Melican or McCartan if he goes back. But then, as I said, they've also got a lot of fast-paced options which Sydney don't tend to like. So, again, it's all about that forward link-up. I think if they can get it going, I think the Suns could win by, as much as, 20 or 30 points. But, yeah, if it ends up being a bit of a scrap, bit of a rebounder, it's about...
Yeah.
I think Sydney actually have more creative options from the outside. I don't think their standard forwards will have much impact in the game. I think Gold Coast defense is good enough to sort that out. But yeah, as I said, it's I think it's about creativity for goals in this match.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And weather could also be a factor. I don't know what the weather's going to be like on Sunday. We know that the Suns can play very scrappy, but definitely not as scrappy as the game that they just played because obviously Richmond beat them. But in terms of just kind of head-to-head matchups and just how each team structures, Sydney could very much get the upper hand here if they figure out kind of the same way that Richmond shut down the Suns' movement. I think they could be a difference maker in terms of Sydney generating more forward scores, especially off of their halfback, which Nick Blakey has been doing a ton of this season.
That's weird. That's sort of weird because it's I would say if it was 2024 Sydney, this would just be a flat out easy win. Sorry, I should say 2024 Sydney.
Yeah, you're right with that.
Yeah, because as I said, it's they shut off a lot of the outside contest, and that's where, as I said, the Suns dry up. But Sydney just aren't playing like that this year, so I don't think you can take last year's sort of expected goodness into this match. But if they can find shades of that, it would go a long way for winning.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. So it's honestly, I think safe bet, maybe the Suns. Home field advantage. For the most part, they've got really good movement at the moment. But I definitely Sydney could 100% steal it from them. So it's going to be very interesting to watch. All right, jumping over to much more of probably another close game this week. Carlton and Geelong at the MCG, the Battle of the Deconings.
Yeah.
Going to be interesting.
And there's been some pretty good contests between these two in recent times, often high-scoring events. As you mentioned, often a nice little battle between the Deconings. Obviously, Tom Deconing got up in a really big way in Carlton's massive win against them last year, back when they were looking to be top 4 locks. Very, very different Carlton, though, this year. So, honestly, Carlton's defense are all right. Systematically, they've had a few, but, what team hasn't, systematically been poor defensively this year? There's not really been too many lockdown teams. So, as I said, if both teams can get a bit of offense going, obviously you imagine Geelong have a bit more avenues, especially with, I don't think Mackay will be back for this one, so they're going to rely a lot on their, you know, sort of more makeshift players to convert. Whereas Geelong, even their second tiers are a lot better converters. Well, even like last game, your Manners, your, what do you call it? Your Shannon Neals, your Oliver Dempsey's,
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I can only see this going to a shootout, and then it's hard to see Geelong not winning, even though it has been Carlton the last few times. But the midfield is where it can be set up because Geelong midfield, like it can be very good. It can generate a lot of score, but it's not very possession heavy, and it can cause a few fades. So if Carlton's midfield gets on top, it can at least set them up to start Geelong from their back half at the very least. If not, score from centre bounce a bit more. So you know, um, yeah, I'm still going to tip Geelong, but like, there's avenues where I can see Carlton can make this a very good contest.
Yeah, I'm pretty
I
much in
just
the same
imagine
boat.
at some point it's going to be a shootout, and yeah, Geelong's just too offensively proficient for me to think that they're going to lose a shootout against pretty much any team in the competition, really. But especially against Carlton, who have dropped a bit this year.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I'm definitely leaning towards Geelong in this regard. Again, I think they're going to be much cleaner. I think they're going to be much more efficient, especially with their forward line structure, not really having to change it all. Um, well, provided there's no injuries or MRO reports. Obviously, that game had just finished by the time whilst we're recording this, so I don't have any of that information currently. Um,
Yeah.
but like just in terms of just on paper matchups, like yeah, I think Geelong kind of just outclassed Carlton in majority of ways. Although I really do like that Carlton is making best of what they have, especially without
Mm,
Mackay, and the fact that they're having to rotate because they can't consistently have both Mackay and Kerner out there at the moment.
mm,
And having to use Durden more, having to rely on Hewitt a bit more through the middle, which is
yeah.
which is good for them because he's an incredible midfielder right now. But I think
Lewis Young as well.
yeah, that too.
He's like sort of the less good Brody Kemp, but now has to play. So
But yeah, so I think
yeah,
Geelong just kind of have this hands down, but I think Carlton can make it really interesting and um, hopefully really close. It'd be really good to see another close match.
yeah. I just think there's like a breakaway point, and I think for watching this, you just hope that it comes later rather than earlier.
Yeah, 100%. All right, jumping over to our last game of the match at Marvel Stadium, of all places, it's Hawthorn hosting the West Coast
Mm,
Eagles, one of our very few bird on bird matchups.
yeah, and look, as I said, West Coast were very valiant against Essendon. However, geez, there's been some blowouts in this contest, and you can sort of see why, because Hawthorn, when they can get their midfield game firing, are very good at generating scores from them. And West Coast, again, still don't provide that much resistance. So yeah, as I said, I don't think Hawks are going to be a team that allows too much movement either way. Like their movement going forward is going to be a bit too damaging. Their movement defensively still going to restrict the Eagles inside 50. Again, it's just, I think this is just going to be a case where if Eagles can convert as well as they have been, they might make this like not a blowout, but
Mm-hmm.
it's hard not to see Hawthorn wanting to get a bit of a steadier handed to them. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
they'll be very keen to get the win. Probably not in their mind, but they'll want to ruthlessly get percentage if they get a chance to. So, you know, it's going to take a lot for the Eagles to make this a contest.
yeah, absolutely. I think Hawthorn will just make this a blowout. They perform so much better in so many other avenues. Obviously West Coast do have one or two shining moments. That usually comes in the form of Jake Waterman. But I don't think it's gonna be
Hmm.
too much of a surprise if Hawthorn just completely dominate this match.
Yeah, exactly. And even for the Eagles, like, Hawthorn don't have those toll options, but, the Eagles on ground level, they're just okay sort of thing. They can give up a lot of general shot plays. So, you know, as I said, you'd think that's a matchup where even if McGovern, gets up and running, it's still going to be hard for them.
Yeah, exactly right. I think, I think Hawthorn is just gonna. Well, we know they have a stellar defense. We've been touting that pretty much all season long. They should, for the most part, be able to nullify the West Coast's entries, especially if they're going towards Waterman or Allen. They'll be able to just make that an easy contest. Um, Considering they're playing at the only stadium that has a roof, you don't have to worry about conditions all too much. It's just going to be about hard fought pressure. Um, for West Coast, they probably don't want Hawthorn to try and get it through their midfield, because that's where a lot of Hawks' strong possession lays and how they do a lot of their transition work. But yeah, Hawthorn are just going to completely wipe the floor with West Coast. I don't think it's any sort of competition.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, even on the outside, you said a lot about the inside, but we've got like Jaden Hunt versus Massimo D'Ambrosio.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a mismatch. So
It's
Hunt can run with him, but you know what I mean? Like disposal wise, it's night and day.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. All right, that will do us for this week. Thank you all so much for coming to hang out, coming to chat, coming to listen, coming to watch episode 55 of the Coast to Coast AFL podcast. We will be back next week for episode 56, of course. If you're interested in seeing what we get up to, or just stuff that are podcast related, go to our socials, at Coast to Coast AFL podcast on YouTube and Spotify, of course, is where you'll find the episodes. But we're predominantly active on our Instagram and occasionally our TikTok. I will be posting that I will be boots on ground, of course, for Anzac Eve. If you're interested in what I personally get up to, please go check out my socials. I know Sarek doesn't use his socials all that much, but it's there if you want to go check it out anyway. I am doing a bunch of stuff this week. I've got the Twitch Melbourne meetup after the footy on Thursday night. So if people are still around, I might share some stuff about that. Otherwise, I'm still streaming as per usual. There'll be no stream tonight as of recording this because you can probably hear my voice isn't all like 100% there. I thought it might have been, but apparently it's not. But that's fine. But yeah, I've got some other stuff that I'm working on behind the scenes. I can't talk completely about it just yet. But they're all tournament related, similar to the Marvel Rivals stuff that I've been doing in the past. But possibly for Overwatch. We're very, very excited for it, and I will let you all know when that gets officially announced that I'm involved. But until then, thank you all so much, and we'll see you all next week for episode 56 of the Coast to Coast AFL podcast. So until then, take care.